Doc Roger. We are now live in Facebook. You may proceed.
Yeah, thank you so much. And once again, good morning and welcome to our second day of the fourth conference of Philippine politics and culture. We had a very engaging and meaningful exchanges yesterday and discussion with the presentation and participants. So we are still hoping that it will be the same, and even uh, kung pwede, we can even madugangan with a lot of our plenary speakers this morning uh, and paper presentation installed for this for today. But to start with, I just would like to play this song, just like our opening prayer or a sort of a kind of reflection for us to start the day. Okay. Yeah. Once again, and welcome. And this is our second day for the conference, fourth Philippine conference on Philippine politics and culture, organized by the Social Ethics Society in partnership with Koreaso College. So to start our day, we have this plenary lecture to be given to us by Miss Asuna Yoshizawa from Kyoto University. Uh, Miss Asuna Yoshizawa is a doctorate student at Kyoto University in Japan. She has done studies on Christian and Muslim relations in Iligan City. Her papers have been published in journals here and abroad. And the title of her paper is about everyday peace among Muslims and Christians in Iligan City. So, friends, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Miss Azuna for her plenary lecture.
Thank you for introducing me. Good morning and mayang buntag sa inyong tanang. Okay, so I'm going to share my slide first. Okay. Can you see?
Yes,
Okay.
Azuna.
Okay. So actually, what I will share with you today is part of my PhD project, which is the analysis based on my field work in Iligan City from 2013 to 2014. So I'm so happy to share about my research with you. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Okay, let's start. As previous studies showed, and also as those who have lived in the southern Philippines already know from your real life, Muslims and Christians in southern Philippines have developed diverse and dynamic relationships at all levels of society. I mean macro, local, and also micro-local level. So in this presentation, I focus on the everyday practices of ordinary people, such as daily interaction among neighbors, Muslim converts who try to maintain good relations with their Christian families, and the fluctuation of identity in intermarriage families. And I argue that such practices can reinterpret and challenge the rigid identity and the sense of we and they, which are constructed through the past violent events and historical discourses. I will use the framework of everyday peace to explain the various episodes in my field. Some scholars pointed out that identity formation at the community level can be an alternative to the national level identity. For example, Newman argues that while the identity regarding peace and conflict in southern Philippines is discursively constructed as three rigid categories, Christian settler, Moro, and IP. But in the community level, a more flexible and cooperative identity is formed based on the needs of security, welfare, and development of the community. But in Newman's case, the mayor of the municipality and NGOs played a significant role. But even the case that community leaders and CSOs are not leading such alternative identity formation, we can see the efforts of everyday peace in people's daily lives. So this presentation shed light on people's informal, impromptu, and sometimes unavoidable responses to the problems, which are different from official peace activities led by the very ideal concept such as harmonious coexistence. The argument in my talk also can connect with Judith Butler's ethic of cohabitation, which shows a performative response to the other gradually disturbs and changes a rigid and homogeneous identity. So from the historical perspective, I can say Muslim-Christian relation in Southern Philippines has been formed and represented through colonial experience and discourses of conflicts. For example, since American colonial period, Christian settlers from North and Western Philippines to Mindanao have increased, and the Muslim population became a minority. It is reported that conflicts toward land ownership were also rooted at this moment. And in 1970s, MNLF started the armed struggle for independence. Also, election-related violence and polarization through evacuation occurred. Even after ARM was founded, armed clashes between Islamic rebel groups and the National Army occurred several times. These events contributed to the formation of a hostile representation of Muslim-Christian relations. So in my research field, Iligan City has also been affected by these historical experiences and discourses. Iligan is a Christian majority city, as the statistic shows, but in my observation, there are much more Muslim people in the city areas. It is because probably many stayed in the city transiently for business, work, and also education. In Iligan, one of the most vivid moments in which Muslims and Christians were polarized was happened in 2008. In Iligan City, an opposition movement against MOA AD and BJE was raised. During that time, tensions between Muslims and Christians increased. Based on these events and experience, NGOs and also CSOs in Iligan started networking with each other and organizing frequent peace activities, including mutual understanding Muslims and Christians, and grassroots consultations in local communities. Of course, I know these activities are very, very meaningful for peacemaking and also interesting to research. But today, I want to focus on more ordinary and micro-level practices. Before I talk about a specific example, I will explain a little bit about the diversity of religion and ethnicity in Iligan. First, Maranao people who traditionally believe in Islam, and Christians, they are called Bisaya. They are majority of the population of Iligan. They are also originally descendants of settlers who migrated to Mindanao from the other areas of the Philippines. Also, there are Muslim converts from Christians. They are called Balik Islam. In Southern Philippines, the number of Balik Islam is increasing since 1970s. And intermarriages between Bisaya and Christian and Muslim Maranao are usually occurred. The children of intermarriage are called half Maranao or half Christian. So this is a general view of how people live together in Iligan. This table shows the population of each barangay by religious affiliation in year 2000 census. Those marked with a red line, Mahayahai and Tambakan, are barangays I lived in during my field work. In the city areas, where the Muslim population is relatively high, Muslims and Christians live side by side in both communities of poor people and also residential areas for the middle class. Aside from residential spaces, there are many opportunities to meet each other, such as schools and working spaces. Okay, now let's see a specific example of everyday peace practices. At the first, I introduce mutual cooperation between poor people. During my field work, I lived with Mindanao family in a depressed community. In that community, I observed practices between Muslims and Christians, such as supporting sick neighbors, borrowing and lending money and items, sharing side dishes, and also cooperation at the time of disaster. In the community, Muslims and Christians remain cautious, actually. I heard many stories that there are even backbiting each other, like Christians are alcoholic and drug addict, or Muslims are less educated, they have no discipline. However, interesting for me is that I was surprised that even though they usually gossip each other, they quickly help the neighbor if the one has a problem, regardless he or she is Muslim or Christian. Probably this is a kind of survival strategy for poor people, but as a result, they form diverse relationships through daily interaction. In these relationships, sometimes impromptu, intimate contact can happen. I'd like to introduce one episode. A Muslim family, actually, they are my host family, Mindanao Muslim family. Their landlord, actually the landlord, he is a Christian man, needed lower leg amputation because of the complication of diabetes. The landlord wants to mortgage the house to make money for the medical operation. So the Muslim family had to choose whether to give him a certain amount of money or leave their house. In that situation, actually the Muslim family is a little bit in problem. But one day, the Muslim family, wife and husband, visited the house of the landlord. The landlord's leg is already black and necrotic. Seeing the landlord, the Muslim wife and the husband sympathized with his pain. And the Muslim wife suddenly touched the necrotic part of the leg of landlord and asked about his health condition. Like, is this part painful? Or why did not become black this finger like this? And I was there and observed the event. And in my observation, the Muslim wife and husband and also landlord did not interpret nor put a special meaning on the body contact. But for me, it seemed like an intentional response to the wound and pain of others. At this moment, the discourse on Muslim-Christian relations and gender norms was suspended. Now I focus on everyday peace practice of Balik Islam based on their position as in between. As you know, balik means return or go or come back to the former place in Cebuano and Filipino. So the name Balik Islam refers their belief that their first and original religion is Islam. Although they tend to be represented as extremists, hardliners, and even terrorists, Balik Islam people in Iligan made efforts to maintain good relations with their Christian families and friends as they stand in between Muslims and Christians. This is newly registered number of Balik Islam per year in Iligan. I collected this data in Sharia court in Iligan, so I'm sure there are many more unregistered numbers aside from this table. They are increasing. Balik Islam people are increasing and they sometimes have friction with their family members who remain Christian. In case it is not able to make a complete agreement among them, they try to find a compromise way to settle it. One Balik Islam woman, I call her as Mariam here, came into conflict with Christian family over the funeral of her mother. Her mother had also converted to Islam at Mariam's suggestion, but her Christian brothers got angry and didn't accept it. Consequently, basically Christian funeral was conducted, but it was mixed with Islamic style. When I went into house of Mariam, while the white Christian coffin was decorated with flowers and photographs, there are Islamic ornaments on the walls of the room. While her brothers invited the priest to perform the mass on Sunday, Mariam also held an Islamic missionary seminar on another day. So on the day of burial, after arriving at Christian cemetery, Mariam persuaded her brothers to allow a sermon by a leader of Balik Islam, who was a former pastor of SDA. So this is a picture of that time. Christian relatives and neighbors were also listening at him. In this way, the difference of two religions arises. Although they cannot make a full agreement, it is necessary for them to make as many adjustments as possible and practice mixed ceremony to avoid breaking family relation. Interreligious marriage also brings about the same situation. In Iligan, most marriages are between Christian women and Muslim men. We can see the gendered norms in this situation. In Islam, a Muslim man can get married to a woman of a different faith if she is people of the book, meaning Christian or Jew. Of the 20 couples I interviewed, half of them wives had converted to Islam for the marriage, and in the remaining half couples, women preserved their faith. In the case of the opposite combination, a Muslim woman can get married to a Christian man if the man converts to Islam before marriage. But in the reality, the norms of Mindanao hardly permit the marriage between Mindanao Muslim woman and Christian man. So in the case of marriage between Muslim men and Christian women, the marriage tended to be considered as just a natural marriage. For example, I heard people's narratives of how the relationship began. They answered like this: we met around the billiard table and directly I got pregnant. Or I'm with him because I just feel lonely. Or we were classmates, became girlfriend and boyfriend, then married. So they are not special. They met, fall in love, and married. So this situation, like marriage between Muslim men and Christian women, is just a natural marriage. As a background of this situation, I want to point out that there are various opportunities to meet each other, as I explained before. Also, law systems regarding marital relations are plural and can be flexible. Spouses can apply the laws appropriately depending on their situation. But marriage between Muslim men and Christian women seems like natural marriage and free from the binding of religious differences. But after marriage, the moments when rigid identity comes into the foreground can happen. For example, choosing children's religion can be a difficult issue. One Christian wife said, I wanted my child to be baptized, but my husband didn't like it. So I explained that when a child is baptized, he gets many sponsors. So you should accept it. And my husband was crying when he talked about it, but eventually he accepted. And also, when a spouse, in most cases, husband, became religiously devoted, the difference of religion became a point of contention. I observed that some Christian wives had remained in their faith for several years. Then they converted to Islam 10 or more years after marriage. One woman told me that after my mother-in-law died, my husband suddenly became religiously devoted, and I was influenced by him, and eventually I converted to Islam. So in these moments, they need to be conscious of each other's religion or religious affiliation and re-identify their relationship as an interreligious marriage. So in such moments, people practice an ambiguous implementation to avoid serious confrontation. One Balik Islam man, case 3, converted to Islam after his children were born. His wife is still Christian. His children were baptized according to their grandparents' wishes. They attend Mass on Sundays and also Islamic prayers on Fridays. The Balik Islam man wants to give his children knowledge about both religions and allow them to choose freely. That means he is postponing the decision to avoid conflicts with grandparents. This is another case. Case 4 woman is a child of intermarriage. When asked if she is Muslim or Christian, she responded that she did not know. She explains her faith in this way. I think there is no difference between Muslims and Christians apart from the method of prayer. I pray when I want to pray every day. I reflect on my actions, thanks to God, and ask for better things to come. So her interpretation of faith might come from the painful experience of her family, because this case for women wishes for good family relationships. She tries to make her religious affiliation as ambiguous as possible. So this kind of ambiguous implementations connect elements of different religions and preserves choice. They try to make multiple faiths coexist within a family in resistance to the pressure to choose one. They are examples of practice, the ambiguous way of religious affiliation and identity. In case 5 women, I also observe an ambiguous and fluctuated identity. She is a Christian woman married to Muslim Marano man after Muslim man, and after 20 years of marriage, the husband became suddenly religiously devoted. So she started putting a hijab or veil on her shoulder after she learned the teaching of Islam from her husband. In the teaching of Islam, actually a woman must wear a hijab on her head and cover all her hair. But this woman didn't want to do that until she feels really comfortable with it. And she gradually changed her attire and converted to Islam after several years. This case means the woman preserved an ambiguous religious affiliation and identity. And aside from these intermarriage families, in my field work, I met some people talking like this. I'm a Christian, but I join Islamic fasting with my Muslim companions. And others also say, this Balik Islam woman said, I did a confession of Islam, but I just stopped practicing. Like her, people who stopped Islamic practice are called Balik Islam. And there are even people like Balik. So in my observation, like in Iligan, the ambiguous way to preserving ambiguous religious affiliation is accepted by people and the society. In conclusion, I'd like to point out 3 fields of everyday peace in Iligan. First, neighborhood in mixed communities. There are mutual help and interaction based on everyday needs and empathy for the vulnerable other. Second, Balik Islam as people in between. They are practicing mixed ways of rituals and creating opportunities to encounter Muslims and Christians. Third, flexible and rigid identity toward intermarriage. Marriage between Muslim men and Christian women seems to be just a natural marriage, which is free from the binding of religious differences. After marriage, however, the spouses and children are pressed to identify how to be Muslim or Christian, responding to the gaze from the outside. They try to handle the problems to avoid serious conflicts through a strategy like ambiguous implementation. So finally, implications for peace and conflict studies. So in the peace and conflict studies in Southern Philippines, the analysis through the economic or political structure is becoming mainstream recently. So instead of focusing on religious or ethnic differences. But from a different perspective, the issue of identity does not come into the foreground because of the practices which reinterpret and ambiguate the dichotomous differences at the micro-local level. As shown in this presentation and other research on everyday peace, we should reevaluate the significance of the informal and impromptu everyday practices of ordinary people, as well as the official peace process and CSO's peace activities. Thank you for your attention. That's all about my talk. Thank you. Daghang salamat sa inyong tanan. Salamat.
Daghang salamat. Thank you so much, Miss Asuna, for the wonderful presentation, especially as regards to the cohabitation peaceful existence between Muslim and Christians in Iligan City. I've been in Marawi for 3 weeks or 1 month when as part of my formation before in the religious congregation. So I can relate to some of your work and findings, and I can also attest some cohabitation, especially when you go to MSU Marawi, when there is this Muslim Christian arrangement of houses. You know that. So thank you so much for that. Now you live where you immerse into the area, and you have rich data that can really provide evidence of this peaceful coexistence. It can be a good pattern for this interreligious dialogue or establishment of peace. Now, may I open this floor for some questions and comments or sharing of your insight? Who will be the first? Maybe Azuna, you can unpresent so we can see the participants. Thank you, Ms. Azuna.
Thank you. Oh,
Stop sharing. You can stop sharing.
okay, sorry.
Yeah. Stop sharing. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Okay.
Sige, so we will now be opening. Here we have participants from MSU-IIT in Iligan. Maybe
Roger, can I?
Yes, Sir Ryan, you're here. Thank you. Nakahabol si
Hello,
Ryan.
Asuna.
Hello,
Hello.
Mayong buntag, Sarayan.
Mayong buntag, good morning, and hi to Wataro also.
Wataru took kids to the park, so
yes, she. So I'd like to ask this concept of everyday peace, wherein it is the local people themselves who make the initiative to maintain peaceful cohabitation and a kind of environment that is conducive to everyone, despite differences of religion. If, however, we look into the aspect of social media, there seems to be no concept of peace. There's always bile, there is contestation, and people quarrel a lot because of their political differences. So in what way can this everyday concept of peace, for instance, be made applicable, say, if we talk about these political differences that people have, which also can disturb the peaceful cohabitation of people despite the respect that they have for each other. Is it something that we can use so that people can be more reasonable in their discussions, and so that they avoid these types of unnecessary quarrels whenever they favor one candidate over another? So is it something that can be useful so that we can at least maintain the fact that everything that we do, even if we have differences in politics, is all about nation building, but it has to begin from the bottom, which is actually community peace building. Thank you, Asuna, for your
It's a
attention.
very important but difficult question to answer. Thank you for asking. Actually, it's really challenge for me, for my research, to connect these everyday peace practices to the national level peace building or like local level peace building. I mean, like, for example, province level or like city level. So I'm not sure it's good example to mention about this. You know, the former governor of Dimaporo, former governor of Lanao, North Lanao, Lanao de Norte, he is Ali Dimaporo, Abdullah Dimaporo. He got married to Christian woman, Kibransa. So this is intermarriage of two big political families. And you know, in 1970s, the election-related violence very frequently occurred in Lanao province. And then, 1977, that the Dimaporo family and the Kibransa family got married. And as long as no, the religious conflict, events like religious conflict, less happened in Lanao province. So I think it is one example, the everyday peace, like intermarriage practices reflected to the local level politics, I think.
Yeah, if I may add, Jen, my understanding is perhaps Asuna, peace is localized. Sometimes it's because, say, in some areas in Mindanao, the political clans, the powerful influential families, they have control over the population. So it is less contested because people have that sense of security in a way, if we talk about local politics. So that, for instance, in Davao City, there's no quarrel that people support the president. Okay? But when you go to other regions, there are people who are against the president in terms of his policies. And I think this is something that is reflective of the politics of nation states. It is easier to manage peace if we kind of localize it, because there are specific problems and issues that some local leaders can address, and they have also won the respect of their constituents. As you mentioned, one particular political family is able to maintain that kind of peace in their locality. And I suppose that is the case because it's more homogeneous in terms of the issues that they have to deal with. But when we talk about nations that are quite bigger and have differences in terms of cultures and values and historicities, so that's where the problem lies. Because if you now talk about Manila vis-a-vis Mindanao, the Ilonggos vis-a-vis, say, for instance, the Cebuanos, we have particularities in terms of our identity, and that's where the conflict arises. And so I think that's how I look at it, so that if we are to address issues regarding peace and conflict, your paper is very good, I suppose, because it's able to highlight the importance of local peace building. Thank you, Asuna.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sir Ryan, and for that question and your sharing. I mean, I think Sir Joseph Bibal, I think you are from Xavier, if I'm not mistaken. You have comment and you tried to open your camera a while ago. Would you like to share, Sir Joseph, some of your maybe comments, observation, or if you have some questions? Sir Joseph, or if you are still there, or if your internet is quite stable.
Yeah, I think the comments of Sir Joseph, they
Yeah,
are
you can, yeah. Please, Asuna.
they are kinds of like very everyday peace practices to avoid conflict with Muslim. No? Maybe Christian inhabitants try to eat pork without making the Muslim people's feeling bad. So yeah, for my research, I want to to emphasize the importance of these very ordinary practices. Thank you for your comments, Sir Joseph.
Okay. Yeah, that's good in terms of very being sensitive to one's practices without to really avoid offending the other. And your paper, Asuna, is really about the. It's good to as Sir Ryan was saying a while ago, can be useful in our effort to really attain peace and kind of respect and tolerance, no, with others. Although there are also some experiences, the thing that if we focus on this few negative experiences as portrayed by media and even by some people, and when I stayed in Marawi, I also experienced that, but very minor, no, compared to the efforts of both group to really maintain peace, because I also went to the house of the Mapuro you mentioned about a while ago, the place there, and I was taken care very well by the family. It was part of the program that I have to stay 1 week with a Muslim family. So I spent 1 week and was taken care very well by the Dimapuro. And after that, I even came back. I think it was December. I was invited by a group of Christians to have a retreat, and I visited again the 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 house of Dimapuro. So I think the experience in Marawi, if we highlight what you have discussed and what you have discovered, all this. Of course, there are really glitches. No, there are some negative or maybe an kind of untoward incident. But compared to the efforts, we can highlight that. No, and that is your paper. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Again, if I still would like to invite some more if there are comments or sharing from the audience before we proceed to the paper presentation of Sir Guillermo. We'll see the chat box, or maybe.
Hello, Sir Roger.
Yes, yes, engineer, go ahead, go ahead ahead.
Okay, okay,
Okay.
that's a question. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing the data, Ms. Yoshizawa, no? Asuna. No? It's quite revealing, no, that how people are actually very open to some form of religious tolerance or cultural tolerance, no, at the very micro level. So, say for example, in a family setting. I'm just curious, though, as far as your study is concerned, as to whether there is really a religious tolerance that's happening between intermarriages, or
Mhm.
are they really just parking the issue for a later time, no?
Mhm.
To have a peaceful coexistence in the meantime, no? Or is there really some sort of a religious understanding of the other side that's happening? Or is it more of it is more convenient to park it for a later date, decide your religion 10 years from now. In the meantime, let's have peaceful coexistence. Would you comment on that?
Mhm. Thank you for your question. そうね。Regarding religious tolerance in intermarriage families, I think it's a little bit difficult to summarize the situation because it's really diverse depending on the situation of the family and also background of spouses, like level of education or say, how originally the husband and wife are devoted or not. But in my observation, generally, generally, especially the husband, like Muslim Malana man, don't force the wives to convert to Islam. So religious tolerance are preserved more than I expected before I conducted research. But in some cases, as you mentioned, after 10 years or 20 years, maybe the husband get older and people around him died. And he suddenly became devoted. So the difference of religion can arise. So the religious tolerance changing depending on the life course of the husband and wife, and also people around the family. I hope I can answer your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess, would it be safe to say that after all, love does conquer all? Sir Ryan?
Thank you. Yeah, really, no.
Oh,
Love conquers everything.
I
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah, yeah, you're not yet sure. Anyway, so thank you so much, Miss Azuna, for that presentation. I would like to call in the Director of Research and Publication Office of Jesu to present this virtual certificate. Virtual muna. We will send this to you late at a later time,
Thank
Miss
you.
Azuna.
Yes. Thank you very much for listening at me. Thank you for sharing your stories to me. Thank you. Daghan salamat.
Hi, ma'am. I heard, Sir Roger.
Yes, yes.
Nag-unstable akong connection. Hi,
Yeah.
ma'am. Nice meeting you, ma'am.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Though this is the first meeting virtually, but I can already feel the warmth of having your presence. Thank you for gracing us with your presence, ma'am, and looking forward to work with you in doing ethnographic researches soon. And I really love the results of your study, very educational, and I learned a lot, no? Especially because we know the biases of these two kingdoms. Both have biases. And knowing there are two great kingdoms with biases, with conflicts, yet they're living in one archipelago here in the Philippines. So thank you so much for that, ma'am. So with that, I'm going to present to you now your certificate virtually, but allow me to read first the content. Sir Roger, I'm sharing now the screen.
Yes, go ahead, Duki.
Can it be seen now, Dr. Roger?
Yes, it's visible.
So this is now the certificate of appreciation. This is presented to Miss Asuna Yoshizawa from Kyoto University for sharing her knowledge and expertise as a plenary speaker with her talk entitled Everyday Peace Among Muslims and Christians in Iligan City in the 4th Philippine Politics and Culture Conference, with the theme Radical Politics and the Future of the Philippine Democracy, held on April 22 to 23, 2022 at 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Philippine time. Given this 23rd day of April 2022 at Coriezo College, Tigo City, province of Davao del Sur, Philippines. Signed, Reverend Father Dexter Veloso, DCD, President, Social Ethics Society. Signed, Dr. Annalisa C. Serbo, Director of Research and Publication Office, Coriezo College Incorporated. Thank you very much, Ms. Asuna, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Asuna. And thank you very much, Doc Ana, for the virtual certificate. Now, may we proceed to the paper presentation. We have the first one for this morning. The title of the paper is The Profiles of Apo Marcos, Tita Cory, and Tatay Duterte, the Challenges of Prolific Identities to the Deliberative Component of Democracy. This will be presented by Joseph E. Guillermo, a PhD candidate from Ateneo de Manila University and Far Eastern University. Sir Joseph, if you're here, you can
Hello po, Doc.
now... Yes, yes, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Ay, share ko lang po yung PowerPoint.
Yes po, sir.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation from Korea's College and Social Ethics Society. And it's unfortunate that we cannot meet in corporeality or in person. Last time na I was with SES is with Pearl Farm in Samala Island, and it was a really wonderful experience. And it's very unfortunate that the COVID restrictions are putting a distance between us. This is a part of a research that I'm doing right now for my dissertation. My dissertation is focused on Arendt concept of reflective thinking. And basically, although it will not feature, the concept of the profile will not be featured, it is very, it moves the arguments that I'm trying to make in my dissertation. So what do we mean by democracy, at least in this particular paper? Well, basically, what I mean here is that for action in Arendian terminology refers to the fundamental activity between men who see among themselves as equal and can introduce something new to the world. This is different from the means and characteristic of the other fundamental activities of men, which are work and labor. So basically, when Arendt is trying to say work, she refers to things that has some stability and like infrastructures or institutions, while labor refers to the idea of things that will support our life force, our bodies, like food and the interest of birthing and parenthood. Now, their action can lead to power. The gathering of men for Arendt can lead to power, which arises and disseminates after the gathering between men disassemble to their private spheres. So basically, that's a major component of how I understand democracy, is that democracy derives its power from when people gather together and when they create what she calls power for if they gather for a political purpose, it leads to what Arendt calls power, and this power is basically the lifeblood of the human artifice. It what gives life to the institutions that we have. Now, in the discourse theory of democracy, especially developed by Habermas, he considers the pragmatic presupposition that is needed in this gathering of men, which is basically a self-critical presupposition that is self-critical of exclusions and sense of equality that characterize what he calls communicative action. Now, the trend for at least for Arendt and Habermas appears to coincide on the same thing. For Arendt, she sees that the threat to the production of power is what she calls the social realm, or when the private sphere, our interest in the household or interest of the family, is expanded and forced upon the public sphere or other people. So basically, a plurality of people is now subjugated under a single idea. While for Habermas, the suspicion is that when power is, or rather politics can be subjugated under what he calls systems. Now the paper focuses on how the challenges to participative and deliberative democracy can be traced to this phenomenon, or this particular phenomenon of expansion of the private spheres or of systems. This paper claims that the contemporary media environment has challenged this pragmatic presupposition or colonized, to use Habermas, because of the insidious dominance of what we call the profile in social media. Now, the profile is a very new concept developed by Müller from the University of Macau and D'Ambrosio from University of East China, if I remember correctly. And basically, they developed this theory from Luckmann, where they argue that the people develop their sense of identity, their ontological security, depending on what is the available social and economical dynamics at the time. So following from Krieling's development of or theory of identity, they trace the idea that our identity before the expansion of the bureaucratic states, bureaucratic systems, can be characterized by identity with unsincerity and authenticity. So in order to understand what they mean by the profile, we have to retrace back again the previous dominant identity paradigms that we have. So basically, when we say sincerity paradigm, it refers to a public end in view by being true to oneself for the purpose of avoiding falsehood to others through the correct fulfillment of a public role. So basically, in this paradigm, there's a value for honesty, commitment, and being sociable. And a sincere person commits himself to his role within a society. So there are punishments when you are perceived to be insincere or not following the role that is found in this particular society. Now, devotion to a group, sacred or secular, a subset of sincerity, which transcends historical and cultural lines. So let's consider, for example, when in this particular depiction of Hidalgo on the assassination of Governor Bustamante, it was a reaction of a governor general who is acting insincerely by not respecting the boundaries of the church. So at that time, when you are a secular leader, you have to respect the protection that the church offers to anyone who seeks protection from within the church. So apparently, in this particular story, Governor Bustamante did not respect that particular arrangement. So he acted insincerely on his particular role. And as such, particularly in this time, it is seen as a justified assassination. Now, authenticity paradigm is a product of the realization of the paradoxical disingenuousness of sincerity. And it is basically as society, particular Western society, move forward, there's the idea of a original actual self. Because of the argument goes that because of the material changes in society, the original actual self can no longer relate to the hierarchical position that was present in the feudalistic monarchical systems that comes before it. So Taylor includes both the notions of authenticity in its narrow sense of self-creation and individualism, which pertains to self-discovery. So basically, in the age, particularly in the age of enlightenment, the history of ideas, and in the Filipino history, in the realization of the Ilustrados and the Revolution, it becomes a attempt to impose a authentic self of what it means to be the Filipino, for example. So the prolific paradigm is a very novel system that is that can be found in the late stage of modernity. It replaces stratified differentiation with functional differentiation that the latter emphasizes on second order observation. So what do we mean by second order observation? Because of the present system of being complicated, the bureaucratic system being more complicated than before, we are more reliant on the observation of observers. So we can experience that with people who are relying on university rankings, for example, or people who rely on reviews of restaurant. Right? So for example, when you're gonna go out and order in Food Panda or buy something in Shopee, you no longer rely on your experiences, but rather you rely on the collective experiences of reviewers that you've never met. Or for example, when you decide for a school, we've already relied that the HR or the department of the university have already vetted for the particular professor to teach in a particular university. And that particular professor has been vetted by the university that he came from. So even though this particular professor, this particular teacher is anonymous, because of the system or the ecology of second order observation, the tendency becomes that the reality is now, or the identity is now attached to this ecology, this observation, this ecology of observations. Now, the second order observation that contemporary media environment creates has made this third identity dominant, this third identity paradigm dominant. So the propensity of metrics and surveys are characterized by quantitative attention, meaning how many people are watching you; qualitative attention, how many are seeing the quality, associating the quality that is attached to what you are presenting, and the normative approval of it. So for example, as an academician, the usual profile, if you're going to look at your, the usual profile that an academician is expected is, you should present yourself with a background of the universities that you visited, or with the journal articles that you've written. And even though less than half of the people that you will encounter will actually read the papers you've wrote, it creates that profile that you are a respected academician, a peer-reviewed academician. And we no longer need to read the actual work, but rather we just have to check what are the instruments or the organizations that vetted for this particular profile. So that is what Mueller and D'Ambrosio is trying to argue, that because of our very specific media environment of the social, especially with the social media like Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, those things have already eclipsed the previous dominant identity paradigms of sincerity and authenticity. I use the word dominate because it's the idea of sincerity and authenticity is still there. However, it is already channeled or interpreted or mediated between a profile. So even so I hope that's a clear notion on a very new concept in identity theory. Now let's consider the Philippine context. So in the post-Marcos Philippines, Nick Joaquin, in his essays like Questions of Hero and Culture and History, pointed out that there's a what he calls or what Luckman calls an ontological insecurity. By ontological security, it means that there is a sense of confidence on who you are. And I use the term ontological insecurity to refer that, as Nick Joaquin observed, that there is an insecurity on what it means to be Filipino. Now, the material anxiety and the growing economic inequality worsened by crony capitalists from Marcos to after Marcos, it was replaced by the own cronies of Aquino and then Ramos, Estrada, Arroyo, and another Aquino and Duterte. So this series of crony capitalists further destabilized an already fragile ontological sense of already destabilized a very fragile sense of ontological security among Filipinos. So this can be translated, or rather, the most prominent example of this attempts to introduce new codes is our attempts to the Sadai myths or the Italianos myth, which is, I would argue, that is an attempt for introducing new codes or new ways to imagine what it means to be Filipino. For those who are not familiar, the Tatay is a tribe, quote unquote, tribe in South Cotabato, which is argued to be Stone Age tribe, and there's no access from some civilization before their discovery. So, and the Italiano myth is a very new mythology that is popularized because of social media. And those are very peculiar myths because they reify the idea of what is Filipino. So the Filipino, before, Nick Joaquin would argue that the Filipino is not really a blood concept, but rather is a concept of that is very tied with our shared colonial experience. And for it to be reified that we are a existing empire or that we have Stone Age culture to the point or romanticize it into Stone Age culture is a very peculiar movement towards profiles. Now, the Filipino diaspora of migrant workers becomes the quintessential response to this anxiety, this ontological insecurity. And this created a media environment where social media is an important nexus of connection and existential reaffirmation. Because most of us have families abroad. Sometimes we want to reaffirm our families abroad that they are still with us through social media. Right? We used to talk to them even before social media. There will be promos by cell phone providers in providing access for families from here and abroad to talk in a special rate by balikbayan boxes and whatnot. Those are attempts to create to maintain this particular connection. And because of social media, the idea of Filipino pride and Pinoy baiting has become very prominent as reaffirmation of codes to address any profile holes of the Filipino profile in a globalizing world. So what do I mean by this? By Filipino pride, I mean here is this phenomenon where even a Hollywood actor or a random beauty queen is a quarter or 1/5 Filipino, or they say that their favorite food is adobo. Those are things that the usual Filipino find joy as a reaffirmation that I'm still a Filipino despite the globalized context. So this sense of identity and imagined community are renewed and maintained and then subsequently curated through the most contemporary dominant media environment of the social media. Okay. So now, however, what's important here, and trigger warning, contemporary imagination of material anxiety and economic inequality, such as self-rated survey, porousness of the application of the categories of who is the dilawan or the rich elite and who are the comunista, is really dominant in the Filipino popular communication or the rhetoric. Now, consider, for example, this particular case of when people condemn the Menjola massacre, which is I would argue is a correct condemnation. But what is curious is that it's a condemnation because they reject the Dilawan. But they also, at the same time, would use the deaths of, for example, labor, student, and community leaders as rejection of what they call the comunista. Although both of their deaths are arguably caused because both are ideologically aligned. Now, whenever this violence are justified, of course, because people are aware that they would commit non-contradiction, the usual excuse that they appeal to is that it is made to the language of disciplining the disobedience of the reclamadores or the activists or the undesirables, such as the drug addicts, who are just considered as superfluous bodies, in contrast to the implied essentiality of the parent politician. What do you mean by this? The reclamadores will always be there, pero Aquino or Arroyo or Duterte is our only chance to be a better Philippines. Right? That's a constant narrative in order to justify the brutality of each government. I remember my mother who justified, for example, the corruption of Arroyo na at least si Arroyo kahit kurakot ay nagtatrabaho. Even though if Arroyo is corrupt, at least she is working, and that's a very interesting. That's a very interesting justification for something that she condemned with Estrada, kasi Estrada is also corrupt. But she tried to wiggle it out by saying that there is something essential with maintaining Arroyo, for example, in position. Now, Filipinos appear to primarily gather around, appear to each other, and imagine their politics through prophilic language, which is usually the language of familial sincerity. And I use usually because there are multiple ways of how we talk to each other, but a quick survey, a quick look of the propaganda that is released right now is always connected to the pedigree of that particular person. So even if Lenny is not really related to Aquino by blood, she is usually associated with Aquinos. And even though Marcos Jr. Will be justified that the sins of Marcos Sr. is not the sins of Marcos Jr., the pedigree between the Marcoses are still there, still not challenged, still not separated in the public imagination. They're still part and parcel. Na parang I want to experience again the glory of the martial law days through Bongbong Marcos because he's the son of Bongbong Marcos and so on and so forth. Now, this is a observable phenomenon as early as 1994, and it is something that another observable phenomenon even today through what we call parasocial politics. Parasocial is the concept of you have a personal connection with someone that is not really connected to you at a personal level. It's originally related to celebrities. Sometimes every time you watch the IG stories of celebrities or ano yung kinakain, what they are eating, their vlogs and whatnot, you feel that you're close with them, right? If someone cheated on that particular celebrity, you feel that they hurt your best friend. But that particular celebrity never don't know you, and you know that at a conscious level, but at a subconscious and thinking level, there's an emotional attachment, and it's extended to politics. And usually, sometimes national politics is more safer, right, compared to local politics. Sometimes at a local level, it can turn to it's usually more violent in national politics. People usually literally die because of the attachment, the parasocial politics at the local level. Now, although one could argue that there is a economic incentive to be more violent at a local level, so yeah, that's another claim that we could explore. Now, it's different from sincerity because of an underlying cynicism. Because usually they know at a conscious level that politicians are liars or thieves, but when they are publicly tested. So it's not sincerity. They're not really sincerely following a particular politician, but rather they're following the profile of the particular politician. Now, I would argue that these clientelistic loyalties as feudal sincerities are oversimplistic. And I argue that contemporary clientelism is an attempt of securing against specific anxieties. So it's not really a simplistic lord and peasant relationship, but rather more of a very intricate way of reaffirming a sense of certainty, that you're certain that this figure is a father, and with it the role of what we expect from a father. In 2016, this particular drawing from Kim Jacinto is a very, very popular image in political propaganda of comparing Duterte with the Punisher, which is unsurprisingly is a father figure in the Marvel comics that is willing to go to do violence for the memory of his wife and son. And that sense of security, the sense of a profile is something that is permeate. However, what's very problematic, and I think this is the main point of my paper, is that this parent-children dynamic is as a normatively approved relationship extended to the public sphere with its implied hierarchy. It's tit for tat and a variety of romanticization of for violence and violations a parent could do to a child or for a child. The things that we can do for love are usually excuse. Is it something that we have to? It's something that that I would argue that really is challenging in a democratic setting to look at people that we will vote as a parent in a parent-child dynamic. So the disciplining of the parent is now analogously extended to the state and its agents. So if you are not obedient, if you are always complaining, you are just dismissed not as a fellow citizen, but rather a child that should be ignored or punished, or both. And any criticisms, if you have any honest criticism against this parental figure of politician, it is tempered or outright excused by a tacit hope that we usually give to our parents, no matter how bad they are or where. But usually when a parent is, when our parents usually do something that we don't like, what is the usual excuses that we make? Pasensyahan mo na, magulang mo naman yan. Is that particular choice, that particular code, something that we have to, that is challenging in a democratic setting? Kasi for example, if a politician commits a mistake, pagpasensyahan mo na, matanda na yan. And that's a very problematic posture to assume. Now, so basically, the parent is usually the tyrant in the private sphere. And of course, the tyrant is a very loaded term, pero I use the word tyrant here in the usual Greek term even the Greek term is very loaded. But I refer here to the idea that there's a dominance, an implied dominance of the parent in the familial space. Now, obedience and the religious fatalistic subtext of necessities is now applied to the contingent elements of the world. So what is contingent in the world, for example, geopolitics is a very contingent element in the world. It is now read through fatalistic or religious lens. Na he's destined to be our leader. She's destined to be our leader. He is blessed by God. She is blessed by God, and we have to follow that. We have to follow that parental figure of a politician. So the calcifying effects of norms and roles of systems subsequently limits new things coming from the life world. And civic equality is a product, and the implication here is we forget that civic equality is always a product of material and private security. So see the argument, I'm following here the argument of Arendt that you are, once you settle everything in the private sphere, you can only then is it okay to participate in the public sphere. So insecurity from this usually allows us to regress to imagining our public relationship in intimate terms such as, but not limited to, Apo or Tita and Tatay. The familial language challenges, if not significantly constrain the dimensions of what and even how to deliberate. And power, following Arendt, is created among equals. The roles of parent and child implies an implicit hierarchy and hamper the realization of power in the public sphere. So action among equals creates something new in this world. Instead of regurgitating the familiar things of the world, and we have to look at democracy as a space to judge and be judged. And sometimes that is the problem with social media. We look at social media like a diary, na parang it's a private space, but no. So we have to remember that social media is part and parcel of how we develop our, or the public can judge it. I remember one complaint that I have, there's this story in Facebook where the husband is saying that or the wife is complaining that there's no more, well, she no longer feels that she achieved anything, right? Pero but the husband assured him that his achievement is her achievement. That even if he forgets to flush, the wife can flush it for him. So a lot of people judged them poorly, and the wife defended the husband. Those are inside jokes, and I said I thought that why would you expect the public to understand a private joke? And that is we have to remember that in the public sphere, especially in the practice of democracy, it is always a space to judge and be judged. And of course, we also have to remember.
Minutes, sir.
Yes, pa.
5 minutes.
Yes, pa. Patapos na rin. Last slide na. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, of course, the question of the happy memory and the nostalgia of the polis. And of course, if we go back to Rick Per's argument on the happy memory, we sometimes expect our parents to be better people. And sometimes there's a hope. Sometimes, I'm not saying that looking at your politicians is necessarily always a bad thing, but sometimes we have to be very aware whether we're just playing on nostalgia or are we hoping that the parents that we have, or the father, or to borrow from Nietzsche, the fathers that we have, if we don't have good fathers, we have to invent ones. And I think that's the challenge. I think that's one of the challenges that is tasked on us. It's not necessarily to say that it's bad to imagine, to draw from our experiences of our parents and judge and to evaluate politics in that way. But the challenge there is to be aware if you're just committing nostalgia. So there is a politics of judgment as opposed to the politics of mere entertainment, a politics of expectating and judging. So what is a solution that I'm trying to explore here is, I think it's building from the Kantian critique of judgment. Arendt's proposal is what she calls representative thinking. And this is, to sum it up, is the capacity of a disinterested imagining outside of one's community, our private interests and biases, and our local partialities. So again, thank you for the time and your attention. Comments and welcome on this developing paper is welcome at my email at FEU. And again, thank you for Jesu and SES for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much, Sir Joseph Guillermo. Any comments or question from the group? Sir, you can now stop sharing your sir, your screen. So yeah, thank you. Any comments or question from the audience?
Hi, Roger. I ask a
Yes,
question.
yes, Sir Ryan, go ahead, sir.
Hi, Joseph. Excellent presentation.
Meron pa.
My question is pertaining to the identities that we create online. I think 2 days ago, Presidential Bet Isko Moreno said something about booking, and there was, of course, a lot of criticism against him. There was, however, this interview with a young woman. I forgot her name, but she mentioned that it speaks a lot what Isko said about this idea of they can book his handsome son. She said that it
Nawala po yan.
respect to this notion of identities that we create online. Isn't it a stretch that somebody passes such types of judgment against others when they create
Nawala si sir.
Nawala.
Yeah.
Napuputol yung...
Oo. Unstable kasi yung internet doon niya.
Pero from what I gather, if I could answer po, Doc, maybe a short comment because that's a very interesting. I'm very ambivalent on judgment on profiles, or rather on limiting our judgment on profiles because I that's a problem with appearances, or rather with editing, and of course the new phenomenon of deep fakes. And I think that's why for Arendt, I would imagine that for Arendt, she would reject the idea that power comes from online discussion, but rather from actual physical, corporeal talking. Because it's very easy to be cruel online, right? For example, one of my favorite pastime is just fighting other people in the comment section because it's very easy to be an asshole online. Pero when you talk with someone face to face, right? When you break bread with someone face to face, I think that's what Arendt is hoping, or rather pertain, or very optimistic with what she calls power, to use the idea of Isko selling his son, and we're just basing our judgment on a very limited profile of Isko. He's a sexy star, his son is handsome. This particular interview, I think we can judge that particular profile, pero we have to be aware that's a very limited judgment, right? So, for example, that's why it's very important to be corporeal, to be face to face with other bodies. I suppose that's that's my comment on that particular unfortunately very short putol-putol na question, Dr. Mabola.
Thank you so much, Sir Joseph. Actually, he really sent me a private message informing you that about his unstable internet connection, and of course you have answered already. So, anyone who would like to ask or share another comment or question? Okay, hearing none, we thank you so much, Sir Joseph, for your
Thank you, Doc.
very wonderful presentation. And maybe if some others would like to engage you there in the chat box, you can continue while we proceed with the next another interesting paper from Mabantao National High School. entitled Crossing the River to Reach the School, the Academic Tale of Students. This will be presented by Michael Gatchalian of Mabantao National High School. Sir Michael?
Yes, sir. Good
Yeah.
morning.
Good morning.
Sorry. Okay. Let me share with you my paper with the title Crossing the River to Reach the School, the Academic Tale of Students. Actually, when I was assigned in Mabantao National High School, joining in DepEd 2016, I've noticed that 50% of the population, especially when the rainy season, most that 50% is absent. So I beat out and then finding the reason why the students are absent. So I began questioning myself as well as my colleagues. What are simple reason why these people or these students are simply absent? So they explained to me that the geographical location of Mabantao National High School is nearly located or rather nearby the river of Libuganon. So that's one of the reason why the students are merely absent. So from that moment, I began start to question and then inspired to conduct a particular study, finding out what's the reason behind uh, the students' absences and the reason why they could not simply get their lessons. So from that point of view, I was inspired uh, looking at the problem. So by um, reviewing the review of related literatures as well as the studies all over the world, I simply understand that not only in the Philippines but also in some part of the world, especially the third world countries, also experience with this unbelievable uh, experience of crossing the river just to reach their school. And particularly, students of Mabantao also experience this tremendous the community simply look at it normally, yet the experience of the students is abnormal because their lives are simply endangered upon crossing the river in order to reach the school. So I am inspired and guided with the three questions. What are the experiences of students while crossing the river to reach the school? How do students face the challenges relating to academic learning? What insights can be drawn from the experiences of students that can be shared with their peers, teachers, and school as an instrument to eradicate danger of crossing the river? So with these three questions, I am guided to seek and understand the reason why the students could not attend their classes and even submit their portfolio, their performances in the school activities. So from the theoretical lens, of course, any study cannot stand without the theory. This theory will serve as a backbone in order for me to capsulize and to understand this particular phenomenon. So I embrace the idea getting from the lens of Nussbaum's capability theory, Althusser, as an apparatus to understand the experiences of students, and from Pierre Bourdieu, especially in an abnormal playing field where the students are always in danger of crossing the river to reach the school. Research design. This is a purely qualitative design using the phenomenology from the experiences of the students. I simply use triangulation methodology in which I applied IDI or in-depth interview and focus group discussion. So I have 7 participants who indulge in IDI or in-depth interview, and the rest are in the focus group discussion. So the study is limited among the students of Luwan and nearby sitios who participated in the study. So through the IDI and in-depth interview, I have the teams based on the experiences of students. There were four emerging themes in the experiences of students. One is life in the bangka, life beyond balsa, life and death along the river, and journey in the thick mud. Actually, my apology because I don't have an actual picture of a student who are drowning in the middle of Liboganon River. So based on the experiences of students, life in a bangka, basically when they have a normal day-to-day of crossing the river, students are using the bangka. But during the rainy days, despite of the abnormalities because of their interest, the eagerness to cross the river and to attend their classes, that's why they're using the balsa. And sometimes they use the improvised balsa, having the trunk of the bananas in order for them to cross the river. And there are also experiences because of their eagerness, the naughtiness of the students. Sometimes the bank turned upside down, and that's the reason why there are instances that students almost get to death because of the drowning. And their eagerness, aside from using the balsa, of course they need to walk for a 15 minutes walk. That's why if you see the journey and the thick mud, most of the students are really walking in a knee level thick mud. From the challenges, we have new road, ingenuity for extension, a dream for the insight. We have dream for education, and the construction of hanging bridge. For the challenges, most of the students really manifested that they wanted to have a new route just to reach the school. However, in terms of ingenuity and extension, teachers who really understand the situation with students, sometimes we give and supply alternatives just to attain a possible performance, or rather extra assignments. That's how the teachers and students also make some efforts to replenish their absences. Now, for the insights, a dream for education is the most inspiring. Why the students are really buwis buhay na the reason why they wanted to cross the river, the hunger to learn and to attain something, because their community, if you've seen the community, most of the people are just merely laborers. They are sons and daughters of laborers in that area. And of course, they wanted to have a hanging bridge uh, instead of doing the normal life while crossing the river. For the implication for practice, in the process of operation, the Department of Education may plan or design a program, but basically because budgets are seemingly focused with the development of schools, somehow MOA is intended for electricity, water, and so on and so forth. But in the dissemination of information, the students can gain awareness, interest, apprehension, and realization of the problem, that they may able to understand the danger, and as well as pursuing their education. Hopefully, with this, the result may also help for us to touch the NGOs, aside from formulating more, knocking the doors of the local government in order to address the problem of our students. I have here the references. That's all. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, Sir Michael. You can now stop sharing your screen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy that there is already hanging bridge being constructed so that the students can now cross safely to reach the school. My question is, Was this hanging bridge a kind of inspiration of your study, or when was this hanging bridge constructed, Sir Michael?
Actually, the hanging bridge was erected 2 years ago when just a courage of calling the attention of the LGU. Actually, I am personally called by DepEd why I personally knock or call the attention of LGU. By calling LGU, supposedly dapat kasama ko daw sila of telling the story and the life of our students. Parang
So
napopoliticize po, sir.
that means because you go ahead of them, or maybe you went to the LGU without them in your own
Yes, sir.
initiative.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Parang naging somewhat may issue konti, no?
Yes, sir. Yes,
But
sir.
anyway, the is that because you went to the LGU, the hanging bridge was constructed, or maybe because the LGU know the reality in the ground, and they are so inspired to also maybe to respond to that. May
That
actually the point is product ba yan ng study mo to talaga? Ganun ba?
actually, sir, sabi nila because when I joined DepEd 2016, so having there, I know there was a plan of constructing a hanging bridge, but they don't have the basis nor a scientific evidence to address the problem. So my study really helped the LGU to understand and the urgency of constructing the hanging bridge.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. You have done great work there in Mabantao. Continue doing a lot. No, it's so nice to have this data really to really a kind of pressure to these local people to do their task, because that's basically their concern. And we're here as teachers and researchers, always providing data so that their services would be also be research based. Thank you so much, Sir
Yes, sir.
Michael. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
maybe there are other uh, colleagues here who would like to ask question. Maybe you can just unpresent na, Sir Michael, your screen. Stop sharing ka na, Sir Michael.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Na-stop ko na ba, sir?
wala pa, wala. Nakita ko pa yung slide mo dito. Stop sharing ka lang. You click stop
Teka,
sharing.
ano ba?
Stop share. Yeah. I think up
Na-stop ko po.
yeah, hindi pa dito, sir. You click the up. Uh, I think that's on top of your laptop. Tapos may stop sharing. I-click mo yung stop sharing. Parang dito sa screen ko. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thank you. You're
Opo.
good to see you. You're good to see you, Sir Michael. So you share again, Sir Michael. You just stop
Oh my
sharing.
God. Ayun.
Yeah. Ayan, that's it. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, any comments or question from the rest of the audience here? Yeah, there's a congratulatory comment from Brother Angelo here. Congratulations, sir, for that great job. No, really going beyond, or a kind of stretching your service. No, going beyond the usual. Sir Nelson, you raise your hand. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Maybe just rejoin there in a comment, no? Maybe perhaps this is one of the things that Dr. Vic mentioned yesterday, no? No, but the role of citizens, no, in good governance, no. So I would like first of all to congratulate Sir Michael Gatchalian, no,
Sir.
for having actually put up the effort, no, to actually do that, no. But I think this is a very good example of how we are ordinary citizens, no, can actually also affect government service in our localities, no, by sharing our studies and working with the local government, no. So congratulations, sir. I think all in all, especially with
Thank you, sir.
PRRD, no, one of the nascent calls of his administration is really ang participation natin as citizens, no. Kaya may 8888 and all other and the KRA is imposed on the on the government agencies, no? But it is also our role to actually test those policies as well as inject such activism into our localities, no? So daghan kayong salamat, Sir Michael Gatchalian. No? You have provided a very clear example of how we can actually participate, no, in governance.
Yeah, indeed. You indeed, engineer. Thank you so much, Sir Michael. No? It's inspiration to many of us or to all of us to really go down also and parang engage the community. Parang kung most of the theory doon sa baba, doon sa taas, this time you really applied it and also engage sa community and especially the LGU. So again, congratulations, and maybe if there are some comments later on at the chat box, Sir Michael, you can continue engaging with the rest of the participants. But this time we move on to the other presentation, paper presentation of Brother Angelo Lorenzo Salvacion, who is working from Mater Redemptoris Collegium, Calauhan, Laguna. And his paper is entitled Liberalism's Hope, the Independent Practical Reasoner, an opening for the re-strategizing of the individual. A very interesting paper. Welcome, Brother Michael. Are you from the Redemptorist, Brother Michael?
Brother Angelo, sir.
I mean, Brother Angelo, are you from the Redemptorist?
I belong to missionary congregation, the Oblate Apostles of the Two Hearts. We
Okay.
cater to the young people, yes.
Yeah,
And Mater
welcome.
Redemptoris Collegium is our college in
School.
Laguna. Allow me to
Okay.
share my screen.
Yes. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, can you now see my screen? And can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, brother, we can see your screen and you are loud and clear here, so you can proceed.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event for making this event accessible, in spite that it is online, but I'm very happy to be part of this conference. And for my topic, I would like to share with you this morning Liberalism's Hope, the Independent Practical Reasoner, an opening for a re-strategizing of the individual. Usually, it's very funny, no? Because usually the witnessing comes later after a certain talk or presentation. But really, I'm very impressed and I'm very moved by the previous presenter, Sir Michael Gatchalian, no? Because nauna na yung witnessing before this particular sharing or presentation that I will be giving this morning. So allow me to begin. What light is to the eyes, what air is to the lungs, what love is to the heart, liberty is to the soul of man. Philosophers from earliest times have considered the question of liberty. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote of a polity in which there is the same law for all, a polity administered with regard to equal rights and equal freedom of speech, and the idea of a kingly government which respects most of all the freedom of the governed. Liberalism, derived from the Latin liber, meaning free, is a general approach to the justification of political authority that sees such authority as resting fundamentally on the rights and choices of individual citizens, whose rational autonomy and freedom to choose for themselves is respected by such authority. Now, in particular, liberalism is the view that the most fundamental role of the state is to secure justice for citizens and not, for example, to promote their good or their virtue. Now, protecting their rights and regulating social relations among them is the first priority of political institutions, not trying to make sure such citizens live fulfilling or flourishing lives as in the ancient Greek polis of Plato and Aristotle. Here, the protection of individual liberty, in particular, the liberty to form and revise one's own conception of the good life, is fundamental. Basic to this is religious freedom, freedom of association, speech, and privacy. Now, this priority is based on the equality of status that all citizens enjoy in regimes organized by liberal principles. As seen in John Rawls' theory of justice, his first principle is the liberty principle, which states that each person has the same and indefeasible or permanent claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties, which scheme is compatible with the same scheme of liberties for all. Now, nindot kaayo, no? It is obvious that the individual is of prime importance in this social and political model. However, so ito na yung however. However, while the ideal seems to be satisfactory, it is not without excess. Now, critically interrogating it, we observe that it also has its loopholes when left unchecked. So, we begin with a critique of the contemporary egotistical world, which is a libertarian excess. The narrative of modern man is similar to the story of Ovid's Narcissus, as you can see in the picture. Clinging to the Cartesian cogito and the grand project of modernity, that is the emancipation of the human will from all externalities, he has shunned, just as Narcissus shunned Echo and the water nymphs, everything else other than himself, God and nature. Seeing his own beauty in his own accomplishments and discoveries, man became enamored of his own self and has focused his gaze on his reflection on the pools of modernity. But just as Narcissus withered upon not wanting to leave the reflection which failed to reciprocate his love, the modern man has lost himself. Now, observing our contemporary social life, we see that what characterizes it is the saturation of the individual, the exaltation of the bloated ego. So much emphasis is given to achieving one's own wants, one's absolute freedom, and one's self-governance. The individual continues to live his life to provide for himself. In Tagalog, kanya-kanyang diskarte. Kung sabi ni Saya pa, way butanay. In many observable instances, the society only becomes an accessory for the individual, taking the minimal role to secure the rights of the individual, that the individual is not violated. And so, instead of a responsibility in decision making or playing roles properly related to an individual's networks, many individuals only concern themselves with their personal concerns. Even the media promotes this. The members of a corrupt government specialize in this. The mother who wants to abort her child wants to exercise this. Our contemporary society inclines itself to be a society with selfish, paloob individuals more than individuals who would be generous and give palabas, contributing to the common good of the society. There is, as we see, an overload of the flourishing of the mining business. Anong mining business? In the advocacy and patronization of the I, me, myself, and the mining business. And what can be a more appropriate contextualization than the selfie phenomenon, which is only one example of a neo-narcissism epidemic. Now, all this egoism can be traced to no other than the moderns, many of who propounded philosophies which stressed or overly stressed the ego, its self-interests, and the protection of those interests. As for their political philosophies, they introduced the idea of social contracts which stressed individuals' interests rather than the society as a whole, somehow replacing the individual understood before as citizen as committed to the polis. So here we have a paradigm shift that from the commitment to the interest of the polis, especially in the ancient time, there was a shift to contracts between individuals where the government had a minimal role to make sure that the personal interests of these individuals, regardless of whether or not it concerned the polis, do not conflict with one another. Okay lang yan as long as hindi kayo mag-away-away. No? Even the individual at times can sway the government for his wants and desires. Knowing what they want and having the power, whether economically or politically, to achieve them, certain individuals can bend the society to be instrumental to their selfishness. Descartes' cogito, Hobbes' mechanical man, and Rousseau's noble savage epitomize what led to the present status of disciplinarity in the contemporary world. That is, in a setting ungrounded and unfounded on reality. So here we somehow hear echoes from Foucault. The contemporary life is suffering from the excesses of disciplinarity which heeded the proposals of the moderns. In the hope to be alleviated from the cacophony of voices at the dawn of modernity, man finds himself in a worse situation. Narcissus. By abandoning the senses and living mechanical lives more than sense-filled and organic ones, man has become less human in that he has veered from reality. The reality that he is a being in the world and a being with others. Now, the second part, keeping the individual's feet on the ground. We have seen the extent to which liberalism goes into excess and why it does so. But what has led to this mainly is the lack of attention liberalism gives to the human formation, which basically includes human flourishing. Usually, our education, our formation would be after skills, no? how many of us would still teach virtue? Now, if one is to re-strategize, as our title suggests a while ago, then there is hope for the libertarian model. We can get something good out of liberalism. Anyways, St. Thomas Aquinas always reminds us to find the truth and the good wherever it can be found. The individual must regain what or who he really is. That he is not only a rational animal. In fact, he is a social being. Man is not alone. As John Donne would write in his poem, no man is an island. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Being a social being affects greatly the thoughts that play around the thinking caps of every individual. Man is a being with others and a being for others. The fact that he is in a society. And in terms of education, he who does not learn also from others, as Hesiod would write, is a useless fellow. And because we are social beings, we are meant to build bridges toward a learning and progressing technological society, toward a society of kapit-bisig, of bayanihan, and not build walls against each other. Building walls around ourselves means confining ourselves to our own beliefs and ideas and getting stuck in them while shunning the ideas and thoughts of others, instead of journeying in the dynamism of learning, which actually characterizes our everyday life. As one saying goes, stagnant waters stink. If there is no continuous learning, therefore there is no progress. Non progredi, regredi est. Walls confine people to themselves in their comfort zones or discomfort zones. It is thinking in the box. Walls divide. However, bridges open up new horizons and connect people. Bridges give you access to more ideas, cultures, worlds, and options to the realm of imagination, creativity, and innovation. It is thinking out of the box. It's going out of your comfort zone. It is going beyond, no? Sir Michael, no? Gatchalian. Aristotle teaches us that we need virtues that bring people together. Take, for example, the need for friendship. We need consensus. We need to learn how to share the yoke. We should not see liberalism as simply doing what one wants, for that would just amount to emotivism. Now, this character building should be part of the formation that individuals receive, no? Firstly, from his or her family. He must be in, and this is the heart of our presentation, he must be in, as in Alasdair MacIntyre's term, an independent practical reasoner. An independent practical reasoner. Here, the context is that before he is able to be independent, he has first understood the foundation that he is dependent. So that is the first. Before you claim to be an independent practical reasoner, you would need to first acknowledge the reality, the foundation that you were first dependent. Second, that man cannot deny his web of human relations, his networks. Here, I am reminded by Confucianism's Wu Lun, or the five relationships to begin with in the formation of the Chinese gentleman. The five relationships begin with the relationship of a father and a son, a husband and a wife, a senior brother and a junior brother, a senior friend and a junior friend, a ruler and a subject. So I would like you to imagine, no? Before you claim independence, to become an independent practical reasoner in your decision making, no? Have I considered all my networks? So you can now try to imagine, no? What are my networks? So of course you begin, no? You were first a child. Then perhaps you have siblings. And then as you grow older, you have friends. You learn to have some special someones. Now when you are in your profession, for example, like many of us here, you now become a teacher. Now multiply that to the number of students that you have. How about your relationship with your co-teachers, etc., etc.? Now, for you to become an independent practical reasoner, in your decision making, you would need to take account the whole web of relations. No? Beautiful. So it's very relational. In being well-founded and grounded, he is able to make better decisions, which account not only for himself, that is emotivism, but to all his connections, an independent, practical reasoner. The society must work hard in inculcating the fundamental teaching that man is made in the image and likeness of God and is called to be an individual for others. An individual for others. That man must be responsible not only for himself, but for others as well. Now, the re-strategizing of individual creativity to fidelity, or a creative fidelity, as how Gabriel Marcel would call it, must be at the core of the formation of our contemporary individuals. And this brings us to the last point. The individual with the community. No? The individual with the community. The individual cannot and should not deny his networks. Looking at McIntyre's thesis about the society as a network of giving and receiving, through the lenses of Catholic thought, one would deduce that it is very much in line with Catholic tradition. And it is something from which the individual, whose liberty is fought for in liberalism, can gain so much. Saint Francis de Sales said that the measure of love is to love without measure. Localizing the saying, we find it paraphrased in the motto and life of our recently canonized Filipino saint, Pedro Calungsod. Way sukod ang paghigugma. Now, this measureless love was exemplified and concretized by its head, Jesus Christ, from the moment of his incarnation, when he emptied himself and took the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of men, to his ultimate sacrifice on the cross, when one of the soldiers opened his side with a spear, and there came forth blood and water, until his continuous self-gifting in the most holy Eucharist. The Word of God, our ideas, the thoughts, no, did not remain as a thought in the mind of the Father. Et verbum caro factum est, no? It went out into reality. The Word became flesh. Okay? Love became flesh. This unconditional self-giving, this measureless self-gifting, this giving without counting the cost is a call, a vocation, not only for the Christian, but for all men, both saints and sinners alike. Now, while it seems demanding on the part of the giver to engage in a network of indirect reciprocity, experiences teaches us that it is also rewarding. This is known as the grand paradox of giving and receiving. When you give purely out of love of giving, you cannot help but receive. Yet, when you give only in order to receive, it doesn't work out nearly as well. When we give to others, we take an important step toward acquiring the knowing, liking, and trusting attitude from others toward us. Because when we give off a sign that we care. And when people perceive that signal of care, it is very natural that they feel good about you and would want to give back to you. So you receive. But the receiving aspect should not be expected by the giver, as McIntyre writes. We give because it is the right thing to do. We give because it is the good thing to do. This should be the proper orientation of our giving. Applying it to the society, this thought made me remember a paraphrase of a popular quotation of Kennedy. Ask not what the community can do for you, but what you can do for the community. Instead of magpuna, magpuno. And this giving characterizes the love our Lord gave and the love that He encourages us to give to others. This unconditional love, when practiced, cultivates a very healthy network of giving and receiving. In an article posted by a certain Cindy Yu, she wrote, as social creatures, we are hardwired to feel good when we give to others. In turn, the experience of receiving increases our likelihood of repeating the action ourselves. We're more inclined to give when we have received, and the cycle is self-perpetuating. Now, the challenge for us, especially for us Catholics who profess to tread upon the way of our Lord, is to provide a catalyst, to that self-perpetuating cycle in our own personal networks of giving and receiving by following the example of our Lord Jesus, who loved us usque ad mortem, until death, by giving an unconditional love. Because it's the right thing to do. Unconditional love is an example of McIntyre's just generosity. Love, taken as encompassing all things, all giving, unconditional love is McIntyre's just generosity. And so, as a conclusion, I believe that the genuine mark of progress for our society is when we have formed individuals to become more human towards one another in a community of care and compassion, in a community where we all matter, a community where freedom is responsibility and responsibility love. If this is the type of individuals the libertarian model can produce, then there is much to hope for. Thank you. Once again, I am Brother Angelo Lorenzo A. Salvacion from the Mater Redemptoris Collegium in Calauan, Laguna, and from the Oblate Apostles of the Two Hearts.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, brother. While you can unpresent your presentation now for some maybe sharing, I'm sort of really listening a kind of homily. It's a very nice reminder to many of us. Thank you, brother. So maybe we can entertain just few because we still have one presenter and another plenary speaker. I hope you can at least extend at least even 12:30 so we can also hear the plenary speaker and one presentation this morning after brother. But I would like to share or maybe not share but entertain. I would like to entertain some questions if there are, or maybe comments from the very wonderful presentation of brother Angelo.
Roger, can I ask Brother Salvacion?
Yes, Sir Ryan, go ahead please.
Congratulations, Brother Angelo. It was an
Thank you,
excellent
sir.
presentation. I would just like to ask your opinion as regard to the notion of nation building following the liberal tradition. Do you think the manner by which we as a society right now is something that is conducive to the liberal notion of nation building, which is grounded in the respect for the dignity of human beings? Or would you rather say that the communitarian attitude that we have as regard to this idea of our identity as a people, the values of our community, is something that we are more attached to compared to the liberal tradition, which is rooted in the humanistic definition of what freedom means? Because if we can clarify this, then we might understand what sort of nation building process is more proper for us as a people moving forward. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, sir, for that question. Now, the issue, as we can see, it's very complex. And there are 2 points here that would need to be considered. That though I only discuss half of the half side of the coin, which is the individual with the community, because the individuals would need to be formed as community-centered individuals. So that is the theme of my presentation. However, the one that I did not include in my presentation for the purpose of focus would be the individual concerned or individual caring communities. So here we have the dialogue of individual caring communities and community-centered individuals. Now, it's very vast. The topic, your question, sir, is very vast in the sense that I think even in the formation of our students in the Philippines, there is a wide range of formation that our students receive who later would participate in the nation building process. So, and in terms of communication, we would need to consider that there are really many factors that would need to be considered. First of all, coming from the teachers. Now, the teachers, sometimes we would begin with having teachers with the correct content for nation building, or perhaps a different notion of nation building, or no notion of nation building. O basta ano ka lang, mag-aral ka lang, magtrabaho, makakakuha ka ng maayos na buhay, and then that's it, no virtue. Now, as they considering that it is the right notion of nation building that they try to pass on to their students, there is this cacophony of voices wherein there are noises everywhere, no? O meron silang mga teachers, pero for many students right now, a big teacher would be the social media, no? Now, in the process na sabihin nating tama yung formation ng mga teachers sa kanilang mga estudyante, given that that is the case. Pero maraming noises as the message tries to reach the heart and the minds of our students. Now, on the part of the students naman, iba-iba din yung pinanggagalingan na life world wherein they will have a difficulty or perhaps the ease of grasping what nation building means. So talagang in many different aspects, there are many factors at play in considering this idea of nation building. Pero I think if we are to see our little communities, our little web of relations, and begin there, I personally, that is my advocacy, na wala man ako ma-contribute maybe in a big macro scale contribution to the politics of the country, at least let me begin in the classroom by helping form individuals or my students to become independent practical reasoners in the hope that one day they will be the ones to build a community of care and compassion, and consequently a nation that we would be built together.
Very well said, brother. No, I hope that say our government institutions discover and consult experts like you on matters like this as regard to how we educate our children. Kasi if we cite one instance, that text as regard to the module of a senior high.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Diba? So in Manila, okay, these are bad things happening, but those sort of things should not be reflective of the overall picture of what kind of country we have. Meaning, there are well-meaning people in government, there are very good people like you who can actually make vital contributions to build a better nation. And so we Filipinos must understand that we have to, like as you mentioned, build bridges instead of walls, because we have to be supporting and cooperating with each other rather than fighting each other. Because at the end of the day, it's the common good that is our interest. And what is that common good all about? It's the prosperity of the individual, which should also result to the progress of each community. So I'm elated with
Yes,
your
sir, that
presentation,
is
Father.
correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sir Ryan. We can entertain one. We have from the Commission on Higher Education, Region 11, we have Dr. Randy. Go ahead, Dr. Randy.
Thank you, Sir Roger. Brother, thank you for your presentation, Brother Angelo.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Actually, before you presented your paper, I was already struck with your introductory statement, commenting or appreciating the first presenter, no? That you mentioned that yung unang presenter nag-ano na application na sa kanya, yung you're going to share is still on the idea, or maybe in the church we call it your theological maybe sharing or perspective. Just a little background before my question, brother, is I'm actually in charge now of the theology programs, no, both undergrad and undergraduate. And there is this one school, when I evaluate review their curriculum, I am amazed, or maybe siguro na-intrigue lang ako kasi they have a program but the students could not proceed without experiencing first and 2 years in the community, in their churches. So hindi mag-proceed yung bata, no? And I remember that in the Catholic Church we also have that, no? We have exposure, immersion, etc. And even before you go to the theology in Davao, I don't know others, we have the PTY here, or the SFY. No, it's a 1-year preparatory before they go to the theology. But again, even if these are the programs, they still live in the seminary. Kumbaga, babalik pa rin sila doon sa seminary, they live as one. But this school, particular church, talagang pupunta yung hindi siya babalik sa seminary. Parang regency sa atin, no? Parang regency sa atin. So, what I am trying to ask you is your opinion, no? Since you are also in the formation program, bridging that comment of yours and saying that this is the actual application and this one is the we call it our formation program, no, in theology or in philosophy. What do you think would be your idea, brother? Are you going to suggest something that so that to bridge this gap, no, between the actual situation in the ground and the formation that we have in the seminary or in the formation houses? Just another example, no. Many, if we read in the newspapers or even there is this conception in the social media that the church is favoring a particular candidate because the bishops and the priests and the nuns are favoring this one, while the our church people, which is around 85% Catholics in the country, if you go to the survey, they are favoring another candidate opposite to what this seemingly, I'm just in the seemingly. So my point there is maybe we have not understood our people. So maybe we need to go to the ground and really understand. So now, what is now the implication of this in our formation program? Just for your comment, brother. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for that extensive question. Now, just to give us an idea that in the formation house, the formation is divided into 4 pillars. Okay, there are 4 pillars of formation: intellectual, human, spiritual, and pastoral formation. Usually, we would need to first identify who are we referring to when we are saying that they perhaps are not yet outside or immersed in the apostolate, because it could be the case that they are still in their intellectual or spiritual formation, because there would really be a time that they would be sent out for mission. Because not to be sent out on mission, perhaps you are a monje, no, in a monastery, no, that is, but even in their case, no, they're still participating in the mission by praying for us. Now, what is important here, we need to strengthen, no, especially here in the Philippines, no, because sometimes we are dubbed as a non-reflective people, okay, non-reflective people. We would need to strengthen the intellectual and human formation of our seminarians, of our religious sisters, those who belong to religious groups. Why? No? Bungang isip, bungang puso, bungang buhay. Naway ang nalalaman ang maging nilalaman ng gawa. Kung walang so you cannot love what you do not know, St. Thomas Aquinas would say. But the question is, what do you know? So the problem is we would need to really first strengthen the formation of what is in the minds, what is in the thinking caps of these individuals, of our formandi, so that what they know will sink, hopefully, into their heart, and that is what they would bring out into their mission. Because for some who would immediately engage in immersion na walang foundation, I would call it chamba. Why? You change the circumstance, they will not do it anymore. No? But if you hold on to principles, no? You hold on to principles, even if I change the circumstance, you will still do the right thing kahit walang nakatingin, kahit walang papalakpak, kahit walang, magpe-praise, or kahit madaming critic, because it is the right thing to do. Now, the problem is, if in the formation, nasanay ang mga formandi na, gagawin ko to kasi sabi ni Father, ay gagawin ko to kasi sabi, not because of their own conviction of principles, no? Of principles, then their foundation is weak, and we cannot expect anything from them, even if we sent them out on mission. It would just be chamba.
So, brother, what you are saying is you are comfortable with our setup, our usual setup of forming the mind before the. I mean, that is what we are doing now, diba? That is our formation now. We go them. They will have 4 years of philosophy and then later on theology, or for us for you in the religious, you have the postulancy, novitiate, and temporary. Yes. So what you are saying is we still follow that one because that is what is supposed to be right. So anyway, I am just throwing that a revolutionary thinking, if you call it, that maybe something we can do with our formation program, especially in forming not only the mind of the people of our
Yes.
formandees, but also really the experience in the ground, because it's also different when you experience and later on you understand the theology behind what you are doing, because that's two these are two different paths. So you form the mind, and then later on they will understand what they are doing in the community or the experience in the community without really we are really teaching theology there, but experiencing the life of the people on the ground in our JKKs, in our parishes, something like that. So anyway,
I think,
thank
sir,
you,
yes.
brother, for that.
Yes, sir. So just to add a little bit, because like for example, we would need to consider, because in various formations, it also they're also different depending on the formation houses. Like for example, even for our postulants, we bring them with us in the home enthronements, in our apostolate with the youth. So it actually would differ from one formation house to another, but that is also correct, sir. That even if you are in your intellectual, for example, when I was at UST, every weekend that is devoted for apostolate. Even if I was in my intellectual formation, we had time for apostolate, and it cannot be that we do not have time for apostolate. So I think that's what kept us somewhat, and myself, grounded. And also, we might want to also add that in our advocacy, like for myself personally, I advocate following Father Roque Ferriol's a doing philosophy, not just a thinking philosophy, but ang filosofiya ay ginagawa. And similarly, for a theology, a doing theology, a praying theology. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, brother and Sir Randy and Sir Ryan. Maybe later on, if there are still people who would like to engage in the chat box, you may do so. But this time we will continue with presentation of another paper from the University of Mindanao. He's already presenting his paper, but I still have to read the title. Nawala na ako. San yun. Okay, anyway. Entitled, nagmamadali masyado na si Sir Samson kasi nga na late na tayo. Moral Duty of Social Science Teachers on the Issues of Historical Revisionism in the Light of Emerita Quito's Ambivalence of Filipino Traits and Values. So after this, we still have a plenary lecture, so I beg for your indulgence to at least extend for a 30-minute maybe or so. Thank you so much. Welcome, and welcome, Sir Samson. Go ahead, please.
All right. So good morning, everyone. So for my paper, The Moral Duty of Social Sciences Teachers on the Issue of Historical Revisionism in the Light of Emerita Quito's Ambivalence of Filipino Traits and Values. Now, I have a caveat here that this is not a political agendum critical against any political person, because some of the political person will be included in the paper. This paper only revolves around historical revisionism, no pun intended. Now, to start with, currently we have been bombarded with so much historical revisionism, so many and repetitive that people with poor foundation in history can easily be swayed and believe in. I will only take one concrete example. If you allow me to use flimsily the word concrete, because honestly, it has no ounce of foundation of truth in it. I'm referring to the Taliano gold of the so-called Royal Taliano clan, who once owned, or as they say, owned Hawaii, Philippines, and the adjacent islands. Story says that the descendant hired Marcos Sr. as a lawyer and gave him tons of gold, which the family still maintains in their possession. And if Marcos Jr. wins, he will use this gold to pay off the debt of the Philippines. Yes, I'm beginning to sound like your tricycle driver because it's true. A tricycle driver told that to me. And a lot of academically deprived individuals. You see, historical revisionism is too rampant that it dramatically reached the grassroots of our society, more than that of our authentic history books, which are sometimes reserved only for the elite. When I say elite, I am referring to those who are privileged to go to school. I sometimes see it as a backward movement of the academe towards the time when reading of the Bible is only reserved for the priests, and learning Hispanic language in the Philippines is reserved for the ilustrado. Now, here comes Emerita Quito. Emerita Quito employed the morality of slaves of Friedrich Nietzsche to explain that we seem to enjoy being humble and meek despite the blatant insult to the academe by historical revisionists. Emerita Quito continued saying that we warn persons not to learn too much lest they be like Jose Rizal, who was executed. As a Rizal teacher, I can recall Doña Chodora warned Jose Rizal not to be too smart lest he will end up the fate of Dagombursa, which he eventually had. And that is still true until today. If we speak up the truth and correct them, we may end up being posted on social media and be bashed for speaking the truth. The lies now are so confident that it leaves the truth trembling in the corner instead of shining to the enlightenment of everyone. This reminds us of the painting of the death of Socrates. I would like us to pause for a while to reflect on this image again, about maybe 10 seconds. Again, we are in that era where lies are more powerful than the truth. It calls us for our moral duty as social sciences teachers, if not as philosophers. Are we going to be silent again? Are we going to publish an apology post-mortem? What good is it then? That's why I like the past presenter when he said, when Brother Angelo Lorenzo said, "Osque ad mortem." Maybe it's better that we're doing the apology until death. Now, what is now the duty of the social sciences teachers? Whose job is it now to correct history? Is it Larry Gadon? Because Larry Gadon issued that statement that the things that is going on is not historical revisionism. Yan ay pagwawasto lamang daw ng kasaysayan. So, then, all I can say is now, we are in a crisis. We are needed now more than ever as social sciences teachers. We are blessed to be equipped with facts and knowledge more than the rest of the community. We are the living Socrates, or at least we are the living Emerita Quito, who points the ambivalence of the Filipino traits and values, but never did she mention the ambivalence of truth, for there is none. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so that's just short, no? So that I can entertain questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Samson Bernales. You can now unpresent. Yeah, thank you. And any question or comment from the rest of the audience here? You can just open your microphone and proceed. I think there is none, or maybe at momentarily there is none, but maybe later you can engage Professor Samson at the chat box. But as of this moment, let us proceed with the plenary lecture of Dr. Ray Luis Monteclaros.
Thank you, but I'm not yet a doctor. You're misinformed.
Okay, anyway, Sir Ray Luis Monteclaros, is a professor at the Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology, where he teaches history. A seasoned faculty with great competence, his research interests are on Philippine democracy and politics. I stand corrected, sir. We are now welcoming Sir Luis Ray Monteclaros for his plenary lecture, Radical Democracy and the Survival of the Philippine Republic. Go ahead, sir. Sir Ray.
Moment, please. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, sir. You can proceed now, sir.
Okay. Among other things, the teaching of history is supposed to promote patriotism and to train students into useful citizens. But recently, there had been questions about what sort of history had found its way into our textbooks. If the tree is no, is our predicament then partly because of the education that had been dished out in the past decades? That something is awfully wrong with the that for decades had been the main fare for history students is now obvious for everyone. There was quite a stir when an American historian Glenn May of Oregon University published his book Inventing a Hero, showing how prominent Filipino historians made heard and neglected primary sources, relying instead on unreliable sources on Andres Bonifacio in order to come up with a left-oriented nationalist history. A prominent Philippine historian Rinaldo Ilito, in an article titled Concilius Revolt of the Masses and the Politics of History, published in Southeast Asian Studies, traced the viewpoint of the revolt of the masses to the time when the latter was much involved in the Communist rebellion. The textbooks since the 1970s and 80s were in most cases sparse in its treatment of Spanish history. Theodora Concilio had been quoted as that Philippine history had started in 1872, and the previous accounts had been the history of the Spaniards in the Philippines. And for a national history, these textbooks scarcely mention Mindanao. Paano maging historical revisionism? Wala nga history, wala nga eh. Philippine history taught in the classrooms therefore had been biased ideologically and incomplete and thus hardly comprehensible. The indigenous movement would emphasize a nationalist context which aimed of indigenizing scholarship. Ended up, ironically, as this is the observation of Mijares, no? The erasing from history of most of the 300 years of Spanish colonial period, leaving behind a limited, incomplete, and therefore incomprehensible national history, which dangerously wiped away most of the information on the crisis of the Philippines periodically experienced with various Moro sultanates and communities. Actually happened in 1896. The Moro people's resistance against the Spaniards had been an epic struggle which preoccupied the Spanish colonial government all the way to the years of their rule. They were for centuries the most potent hindrance to the Spanish influence toward southern parts of the archipelago. The raids caused enormous damage such that they were reason for the age of personnel to the ever destitute colonial administration, and therefore the constant focus of military operations. This was the reason Juan Blanco's quick and indecisive action against the Katipunan in August of 1896. The Spanish army in the Philippines had been deployed costly campaign to occupy Marawi and finish off the raids against the small towns in northern Mindanao. That is a picture of Spanish steamships which were launched in Lake Lanao. The Americans had success, having gained from their experience in their campaigns of extermination against Indian tribes of the American West, and from the Spaniards with the toehold they left behind in the spiritual and military efforts. The Americans were richer, younger, stronger, and more optimistic. They also had their own brand of Anglo-Saxon Protestant civilization to preach. Americans succeeded to smoother more resistance, and through judicial application of carrot and stick approach, after sting to pieces all the quotas that dared to resist, and by launching a policy of disarming the Moros, and at the same time providing incentives to those who were friendly, such that they were able to have their trust and have a degree of affection, but the Americans would not be able to do anything. They planned for the Moros for the lack of time and the impatience of the Filipino nationalists. Fear and suspicion reigned in Lanao as the Constitutional Convention for the Commonwealth was announced by the Americans in 1934. As the Constitutional Convention was being convened, a letter dated July 13, 1934, drafted by Haji Abdul Kamil Bungabong, a Maranao knowledgeable in the Islamic doctrine, and signed by 200 Maranao leaders, which they asked for the preservation of their traditional political, social, and economic institutions. The convention simply disregarded the appeal, and the representatives from Lanao, Tomas Kabili, refused to sign the drafted constitution, which was a reflection of the attitudes of the Hispanized, Christianized, and Hispanized elite of the time, and has not included any provision to assure the Moro people of liberation of culture and religion. That's the picture of Tomas Kabili in uniform. Actually, without missing a stride, in most cases, the Moro communities would simply take a cursory transition from the traditional dato system to what superficially resembles a modern local government unit. The traditional Agama leadership of a sultan among Maranos would be enhanced by the electoral victory in a mayoralty race. The mayor of the local town, however, is a dato politico, whose responsibility is defined by the constitution or local government code, but by the exigencies of being sultan of the Agama, whose constituents are not entirely limited with the territorial limits of the town. The implications, of course, are considerable and for years now rather predictable. Runaway graft and corruption in many Moro areas. It was a formula for disaster. The continued blindness of the national government to the traditions of the Moro communities have been such that its development programs have been, at almost without exception, catastrophic failures in these communities, and among the reasons for the higher case of poverty for these provinces. The political activity of the Moro communities would assume the same liveliness and dynamics as the rest of the Philippines, but it would have added dimensions. As the years followed, the patronage politics, which would harden into a permanent feature, along with the proliferation of political dynasties. While this was true with many other parts of the Philippines, this would have uglier features in Lanao, where it was combined with the traditions of Maratabat, Quito, and far higher figures of loose firearms. Elections deteriorated into mini civil wars, as one private army battles another, with the government's forces simply standing aside. Among the reasons for the deadly configuration of Philippine politics in Lanao is the Maratabat. It is derived from the Arabic word martabat, which means rank, status, and respect that is due to that rank. But the Maranaos have carried this meaning beyond Arabic and expanded it to mean rank and sensitivity. About rank, from prestige, it came to be seeking for that prestige, from status to status honor and status enhancement, such that it assumed the implication of faith, self-esteem, pride, and honor. Respect for Maratabat is considered as the most characteristics of social value among the Maranaos, and is suspected that the use of the word actually is a reflection of certain Islamic values. Are you still listening, sir?
Yes, sir. We're still here. We can still hear
Okay,
you.
very good. The political leadership mentality would, of course, figure as partly the reason for the emergence of warlordism, clan obligation. The necessity of being armed, the prevalence of the vendetta or rido would figure in the anarchy after the breakdown of the Philippine Commonwealth during World War II. It was natural for armed groups to start appearing everywhere, as in other parts of the archipelago, but more numerous and violent, and settling scores with rival families, and in certain instances committing atrocities against civilians, against Christians. Picture of the datos of our district in the early 1900s. The winner-take-all nature of the Philippine political system in employees of the local government are mostly employed by virtue of political connection. In Lanao, where nepotism is a common practice, means that there are many who depend on their livelihood on government employment and are coterminous with their mayor or their governor, and will fight not just for their maratabat, but for their survival. During the martial law years, President Marcos' most able henchman in Lanao was the late Congressman Ali Dimapuro, whose loyalty went on all the way to the last. With his own private militia, known as the Barracudas, Dimapuro secured his influence both in Lanao del Sur and Lanao del Norte. By being in the inner circle of the Marcos region, one could challenge his control in Lanao and thus provide political stability. When Marcos, however, was deposed, the chaos was an ideal condition. The reappearance of various dato politicos who began to reassert political clout. The old pre-martial law elite, revived by Cory, was joined by the MNLF commanders who used their armed followers when they participated in the farcical Philippine electoral politics region. The most successful among them would become the ruthless political entrepreneurs whose power to magically gather votes in various Moro-dominated enclaves would make them so invaluable to the national political elites. The Dagdag Bawas bringing in millions of votes in the presidential elections. In exchange, the national political elites would boost the influence of the Dato Politico by channeling all the funds and other development programs. They impress their people by being in the know of various goings on in Manila and being the agents of the powers that be. The resurgence of Islam had been reshaping the politics of the entire Muslim world, including that of Southeast Asia. And if the Muslims in the Philippines were becoming a minority in their own provinces, the Christians of Southeast Asia, most of which are in the Philippines, are clearly the minority in Southeast Asia, with Indonesia being the biggest Muslim country in the world in terms of population. While there had been, of course, always been the influence of the Arab world and even as far away as Turkey in the affairs of Mindanao and Sulu, yet the development of better transportation, air travel, electronic communications has increased significantly. Islam, the Shia revolution and how they financed Wahhabism will realize many more decisions. First, the United States imagined that it would manipulate this into working for American interests, a la Lorenzo of Arabia, thus funding Osama bin Laden to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. But all this changed with the destruction of the Twin Towers in 9/11, the emergence of the radical Islamic groups in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Al-Qaeda, and then the ISIS or ISIL brought into fore the Islamic ideal of a revived caliphate, which they dreamed or they dreamed encompass the Christian, Confucian, Jewish, Hindu population of Spain, Balkans, Greece, Central Africa, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. That's the picture of Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran, the picture of Osama bin Laden. Marawi, Mindanao, sum of all fears. The dynamic of the cyclical nature of the violence in Mindanao was further provided with an added feature with the revolution that effectively empowered those who had fought Marcos from various shades of the political spectrum. Among these were those who called themselves democratic socialists, who studiously set themselves apart from the national democrats or NATDEMs and their extremist communist totalitarian socialist ideology. Among the democratic socialists or DIMSOCs was the Partido Demokratiko Sosialista ng Pilipinas, PDSP. The ideologue of this party was the late Father Archie Intingan, SJ, a doctor of medicine from Duke, who wrote a basic thesis centered on the several principles that was to serve as the ideological basis of the party. As an organization, it carbon copied the Communist Party of the Philippines, CPP, replete with its own front organizations and a shadowy armed unit before EDSA. Martial years, the of the shadowy organizations that gained the interest of the authorities. The AFP tracking down the members of the PDSP and several along with its chairman, Norberto Gonzales, and Dr. Romeo Intingan, SJ, somehow were able to acquire the help of Normie Suarez, who helped them out of the southern backdoor of Sulu and all the way to their camp in Sabah, where they mixed with the MNLF and trained along with them. Picture of Father Archie there. an old picture apparently. Roberto Gonzales, Senator Butch Aquino were instrumental in the meeting between Norm Misuari and President Cory Aquino in Sulu, which was touted as a dramatic gesture of peace and which also gave much needed boost to the MNLF. This was the first indication of how influential the Gonzales Intingan Jesuit PDSP would become in the Mindanao affairs. Roberto B. Gonzales would become a peace advisor and negotiator for 20 years during the Cory Aquino's presidency, a presidential advisor for special concerns, national security advisor, and secretary for national defense from 2007 to 2010 under President Gloria Arroyo. There's a picture of Gonzales, Arroyo, and President Ramos. Just before EDSA, the MNLF had become already divided into factions incapable of any decisive military action. Many appreciate the gesture when Cory Aquino came to Hulo personally and revived the peace negotiations in 1986. Cory ignored the protocol, the threats against her, and met with Misuari inside a Roman Catholic monastery in Quito. She then established a multi-regional consultative committee that drafted the blueprint of a Muslim autonomy that was approved by the Congress as Republic Act 6734 that was going to be defined in the extent through a plebiscite. There would, however, be a final peace agreement with the administration of Fidel V. Ramos in September 2 of 1996. The picture there of the late President Cory Aquino and Suarez in Ville and Ramos and other officers of the MNLF. The same network that would be instrumental in the initial successes of the Bishop Ulama Forum of Mindanao. Gonzales and Intingan were the ones who approached the late Governor Mahid Mutilan of Lanao del Sur, the leader of the Lanao del Sur Ulamas, to encourage him to start a cordial relationship with Bishop Fernando Capalla of Iligan and to organize the Bishop Ulama Forum in July of 1996. The burnt ruins of St. Mary's Parish Glacier of Marawi in 2017 was a witness to the many Muslim-Christian dialogues that was conducted through the auspices of this particular group. The moves were encouraged by the Ramos administration through its Secretary of National Defense, Renato de Villa, as part of the administration's peace initiative. Here, a picture of the late Governor Mutilan with other leaders of Marawi and Lanao del Sur. And the picture there of the sessions of Ulama Conference, General Assembly, the person of Bishop Capal seated alongside the person of Secretary Norberto Gonzales. To many, Mutilan was perceived as a moderate Muslim leader. He had a PhD degree in theology and the Islamic philosophy from Egypt's Al-Azhar University at the same alma mater with Hashim Salamat, and was a missionary in Japan for 11 years. He was also he also had influence in the MILF as he was a friend of the MILF Vice Chair of Internal Affairs and member of the MILF Central Committee, the late Al-Aziz Bimbantas. Mutilan formed his own party, the UMPIA, which had a lot of grassroots support during the time. He was the first man Udima in politics as the mayor from 1988 to 1992, term governor of Lanao from 1992 to 2001. Was the vice governor of the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, ARMM, briefly a member of the government peace panel in the negotiations with the More Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF. Unfortunately, his death in a road accident in December 6, 2007 abruptly cut his influence. By this time, political Islam made a presence among the local political groups in the Islamic city of Marawi, supported by the national leaders personified by Roberto Gonzales. The late Omar Solitario Ali, also known as Omar Salik and Omar Makabalang Salik, whose party affiliation is the PCP Umpia, a former MLF commander, would become the mayor of Marawi. As a politician, he belonged to the Umpia, PDSP, PDP, Laban Axis. After him, as mayor of Marawi, was his half-brother, Fahad Presalik, with Omar's son, Arafat, as the vice mayor. It was during the administration of the late Mayor Secretarial, in which unfortunately, and even worse than the other parts of the Philippines, that the drug trading started to become rampant. and reached its crisis proportion during the charge of his half-brother Pisalik. 2016. Marawi, in spite of all efforts to establish the place as a city, was going to become the linchpin of the economy in Mindanao with rumors of business ties with the Paruhino clan of the Corazon Balaling group of Samis. The Deliberative at that time had his connection with the PDSP, Sweet Peace Advocacy, and had a direct line with the Ateneo de Davao Law graduate Jesus Loreza, who had been President Ramos' presidential assistant for Mindanao, chairman for the Mindanao Economic Development Council. From 1998 to 2000, Loreza served as the official spokesperson for the former president and was President Arroyo's chairman of the GRP panel on talks with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in 2003, chairman of the Mindanao Economic Development Council in 2006, presidential advisor on the peace process in 2008, press secretary in 2009, and presidential advisor on Mindanao also in 2009. This connection with Loreza was only cut off out of delicadeza. He resigned from the start of the Pinoy Aquino presidency and was replaced by Congresswoman Lualhati Antonino. When Duterte assumed the presidency in 2016, he brought back his classmate Loreza once more as the presidential advisor for the peace process. Coming from the lineage of traditional confederacy of 11 clans, the person of the late Mayor Omar Secretario Ali had some influence, okay, and this was the reason for his being able to get into some degree of influence among other leaders of Marawi. Okay, now the person of Prince Kalik was an uncle by affinity by the brothers Mar and Abdullah Maoti. During the administration of Solitary Valley, and unfortunately, even worse in other parts of the Philippines, that the drug trade started to become rampant, reached its crisis proportions in 2007-2016. And this was something that, of course, was very much known, no, by the national government. Okay, eagerness with the person of Solitario Ali, he was trying to have this informed, no, the government with regards to what was happening. It was something he had to do because, after all, there was the influence, the help coming from Roberto Gonzalez in all the elections that he had to participate. According to some observers, it could have been that Solitario Ali was not involved in any of that what was happening there in Marawi, but was not able to control what was happening at the same time. He warned during the problems with the Maote, he warned actually Duresa and impending trouble of Marawi. Okay, and in fact, he had been part of the OPAP, the Office of the President and Presidential Advisor for the Peace Process, right after the troubles in Butig, when it was finally attacked by the military. In all these years, had an unconventional economy, one that was not monitored by the government agencies, quote unquote. Most banks shun any business there, as Muslims have their own concept of banking that prohibits the charging of interest, and so they do not deposit whatever money they had in banks, but keep this in their homes. There were no large business franchises, and the place had no hardwired telephone system, and for years an underground economy composed of the drugs and gun running and kidnapping, ransom, and other illegal activities had been in place. Most people in the province seek government employment. There is no other employer except the government, and the law extends the privileges of priority for cultural minorities, and there was nepotism that was practiced also. In Marawi, there was hardly any real law enforcement, with no murder case ever solved. An observer would be baffled when the streets were filled with mostly brand new high-end SUV vehicles in a place with hardly any large companies having offices and factories. During the Marawi siege, the soldiers were surprised upon encountering mounds of cash and drugs in deserted houses. The PNP and the army had their hands tied to their backs. For years, they could not intervene effectively because some of the armed criminals are members of the MNLF or the MILF, and there were into peace negotiations with the government. They could not take away the guns because at the same time, for the reason above, they were told that in Llano del Sur, having a gun is a cultural thing that they must respect. When the gunfights rage, the PNP and the army are mere spectators, as the RIDO is a cultural thing. An intervention might just violate the peace negotiations. Under the so-called process, peace process, they can only get operations when necessitated by the security and in focus on peace building and rehabilitation and reconstruction activities. The MILF, which was considered as an insurgency, was given all the leeway, and the operation should only be against rogue elements of the MILF. There was only going to be deterrent posture in dealing with the MILF. Years before the Marawi siege, the killing of Christians in Marawi had become a weekly occurrence. The Christian vendors and construction workers were being murdered in broad daylight with never any culprit being arrested. Not even Christian students, most of them from poor families from other provinces who were there because they had no other choice but the free education provided by Mindanao State University. The professors in that particular university were not being spared by the murder sprees, which the perpetrators were never brought to justice. On Wednesday evening, August 8, 2012, two army trucks of the 65th Infantry Battalion patrolling inside the 433-acre campus of the Mindanao State University was ambushed by 20 men who were mostly relatives of Mayor Fahad Prisalik. 3 soldiers were killed, while another 10 were wounded, and 20 students were injured in the crossfire. The soldiers had stepped up their patrolling after receiving reports of indiscriminate firing inside the campus, reports of the presence of heavily armed drug syndicate, and the complaints of students being forced by their landlords with threats to register as voters in Marawi, although they were from other places. Under these conditions of near anarchy, it is simply easy for the ISIS Maote to establish themselves and thrive with all the funds available to them. They recruited, received reinforcements, and organized themselves free from any government interference. In the heydays of democracy prior to the Marawi siege, things were being directed by the committee known as the Lucky Seven Club of municipal mayors, cum drug lords of the province, each of which oversee his own turf of lucrative local cottage industry of drug trafficking and running, kidnapping, carnapping, armed robbery, and smuggled goods sale. All this under the complete knowledge of the Philippine government with its millions of intelligence funds. Thus, the Marawi the decades-old political brinkmanship between national political and local dato politico. We will see the folly of relying on the so-called peace dialogues during which parties try to out-propaganda each other's peace advocates. Nobody who has ever been to Marawi or has been from nearby Iligan will ever believe that the Maote was a total surprise to the military. In retrospect, the Maote might as well have displayed at the city's entrance a streamer that says, Bulos Kano ISIS, welcome ISIS. The siege of Marawi was actually the effect of the campaign waged by the AFP against the Maote clan of Butig. A RIDO had started in Butig in the 1980s after a hotly contested election between the Romatos and the Amatunding clans. The Amatundings and the Pansar clans unified themselves to fight against Romatos and the Maotes, and a deadly RIDO occurred. The succession of deaths of the Romato clan, former Butig Mayor Humbao Romato, former Butig Mayor Abdurrahman Romato, and the Vice Chairman of Alim Bombanta, Alim Abdulaziz Mimbantas, deprived the Romato clan of their sober and experienced leadership, and was the reason why the young clan leaders Omar and Abdullah Romato Maote were able to take over control. While political violence had never been a monopoly of Lanao, but history and the present circumstances transformed this otherwise beautiful region into a perpetually restive part of Mindanao. The lack of understanding of the problems of the Moro people, the manipulative nature of patronage politics, the survival of traditional values obviously incompatible with democratic ethos, and the historical injustice committed against them has turned into a cyclical event, the outburst of violence throughout the contemporary period. That's the picture of the late parish priest of St. Mary's of Maote, the late St. Mary's of Marawi. Thus, therefore, the urgency of eliminating insurgencies and focusing on external defense, due process, democratic values, and human rights must be approached more creatively. The next Philippine president has no choice but to cut corners in the face of constitutional obstructions and judicial due process to solve urgent problems in the country. Thus, the relevance of radical democracy that must attempt to save the decrepit government from unanticipated, unreflected effects of its liberal democratic constitution. In the face of clearly existential threats, being faced by the Republic. There is, of course, no recourse, but a radical democracy that is willing to forgo the rigid institutionalism and legalism for the sake of survival. That's all.
Thank you, Sir Ray, for the very nice history. And I guess it's also a kind of related paper to the presentation of Sir Samson, when in fact is about the role of social scientists in the seemingly historical revisionism. And you said a while ago that there was no history after all to revise. And
What
you're
is there to
mentioning,
revive? What is there to
yeah,
revive when there is actually nothing, almost nothing about
nothing.
Mindanao? So how can
Yeah,
it be revised at all?
yeah. That's a very nice issue to
You're
explore. Yeah,
revise the
maybe.
vacuum.
Yeah, maybe you can unpresent, sir, so we can entertain. I
I'm
can see
trying
the.
to, I'm trying to, I'm
Stop, ano
trying
lang,
to,
sir. Stop sharing. Yung sa taas, sir. Stop sharing. Yan, sa taas ng laptop mo, may stop sharing dyan. You just click that, tapos balik ka na sana.
stop sharing. I am sorry, but
Ayan. Nawala na. Okay na, sir.
okay na, sir.
Stop sharing na. Okay.
Thank
Sige,
you.
so thank you. Now, it's still 12:17, so we can still entertain, no? So very detailed presentation of the history in Mindanao, which really led to this radical democracy, radical concept of the current president. A lot of issues and problems that beset the archipelago, or maybe the Mindanao, and because of this. No? Hearing from your, ano, sir, and looking at some of the pictures, it remind me because yung pare, naging ano yun, siya yung host ko when I was there. It's Father, kalimutan ko yung pangalan. No. Anyway, but siya yung ano, naging host ko nang mag-videoke kami, tapos pag malasing na siya, iganon niya yung microphone. Tapos hindi na kami makakanta. Kasi I know that he was abducted also during that Marawi siege. Okay, can I ask the audience here to give some comments or maybe question? Either to Sir Ray or to Sir Samson. It's a kind of paper that is related, although they have a somewhat, not really contrasting, but somewhat different, but related in some way.
May I ask to Dr. Montesclaros?
Yes, go ahead, Sir Migs. It's nice to hear you. Go ahead, sir.
Just a brief question, sir. How important is Mindanao history to the rest of the country, considering that we are in the periphery? We are not the center of national affairs.
That depends on whose point of view, because if we are going to consider the fact that your national history is not actually national history, because it failed to mention in 1896 that the reason for the Katipunans able to survive initially had been because of the fact that most of the Spanish troops were actually deployed against Marawi, against Maypakpak. By General Blanco, was the last biggest Spanish military operation in Mindanao. And this Spanish military operation, therefore, has to be mentioned. In fact, it has to be mentioned in whatever sort of narrative that you try to consider or define as national history. Without that, there can be no fuller understanding of what actually happened all these years. And also, the fact that when it comes to Mindanao, because of the enormous, logistical problems, enormous expense in which the Spanish, the American and then later on, the Philippine government had to spend in order to, come to grips with whatever is happening here in Mindanao. That makes this particular region very important. You cannot shift to with our problems right now with regards to our external security, our external defense. The AFP could not simply just shift into that concentration for our external defense if there can be no peace and security in Mindanao. That is quite obvious.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Mix and Sir Ray. How about the others?
Maybe to follow up, sir, if there's a need to revise Philippine history, then what is it? Do you recommend historical revisionism?
You cannot really say that historical revisionism is bad, because especially in this particular case, it has to be revised. It has to be revised because otherwise, your history actually is incomprehensible. It's not. You cannot understand what is happening. If we are going to teach history, because this is going to be very important for those later on who will be molding policies. Okay, and there is nothing there. No lessons coming from the past are included there. Then you're actually some sort of you're deceiving yourself, and it's a very dangerous kind of deception. And that's the reason why there is really a need for. In fact, it's already shifting. No, it's no history 1 in college is already JEC 105, wherein the instructor is provided with a leeway. You look for primary sources and present Philippine history by his own treatment of primary sources. That was a shift, but it is quite recent. No? It is quite recent. Majority of us here who graduated from college had their Philippine history molded by the person of Teodoro Agoncillo and the rest of the textbook writers there in Manila, who practically, sort of defined national history as that which happened in Luzon, and mainly there in Luzon. And of course, that is really ridiculous as national history. The reader for revising it.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe can I ask if you are still here, Sir Samson, can you comment on that? Because on that aspect, the history, revisionism, especially in the context of Mindanao. Can you,
Sir
what
Roger,
is your,
maybe before Sir Samson,
yeah,
can
go
I
ahead,
say
please.
something?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Sir Ray, for that sharing. Yeah, I think the historical revisionism is been defined according to, again, as what Sir Ray is saying, according to what perspective, no? But for me, siguro, because as a researcher, in fact, if we will not do research now regarding the history of Mindanao, then what's the point of, well, what's the essence of doing research if we just accept what is written before? So I think that's the essence of doing research, because we'll try to find other angles, no, that are not reported if it is about history. Second is my take on revising history is not really about revising the book of Agoncillo and others. We will provide other books so that students or the people in Mindanao or the entire Philippines could now judge. For example, yes, if you talk about Mindanao, I would rather listen to Mark Chu and Carl Gaspar rather than people in Manila. Because these are people that are living in Mindanao and doing research in Mindanao, and of course other scholars in Mindanao. That's the essence of SAS, the Social Ethics Society of Mindanao. We would like to provide opportunities like this Why are we having this conference? Because we are providing opportunities for scholars, of course, not only in Mindanao, but especially in Mindanao, to share their outputs to their research, so that we continue to expand the body of knowledge rather than containing the body of knowledge as itself. Otherwise, we will just accept everything. No, it's just like the narrative of Russia and Ukraine. It depends on where if you only focus on television, then if you just listen to CNN, then you have a narrative that is being propagated by CNN. But if you read or if you watch other television networks, no, like Al Jazeera and others, then you also have another perspective in this ongoing global crisis. So I think that's the same. That's my take on the Mindanao history, issue of Mindanao history. For me, my take is, again, I will repeat, let others write a book. Write a book about the history of Mindanao and let the people decide where because for me it's not blatant disrespect to Mindanao if you or to the academy. If you write another book, you are also a researcher. You also gather data. No, just like Sir Ray. Sir Ray might be writing another book on the Mindanao history, and it's already for the people to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Andy. Go ahead, Sir Samson. You raise your hand.
All right. Thank you for those comments and questions. Now, I would like us to be refreshed on the, of course, no? So, tagal na siguro tayo, wala naka-teach nito. No, it's okay that people will build their own version as long as it's backed by the truth. So, kaya nga tayo may tinatawag na argumentum ad verecundiam. This is really to, I think this is all about the infallibility of the accounts, no? Paano natin masabi na infallible ng accounts? Because that is backed by evidences and truth. Now, it's okay, no? I'm not saying na hindi tayo pwede mag-revise ng mga history books. It's like in history, as social sciences teachers, nagkaroon nga ng discussion yun is whether the mass was in Limasawa or the first mass is in Limasawa or Butuan, which eventually the historians concluded that it was indeed in Limasawa. Then the academy accepted it because it was backed by evidence and facts. So, but if the sources are questionable, then of course that will fall into argumentum ad verecundiam.
Well, let's cross the bridge when we're already there, Mr. Samson, Mr. Bernales, because as far as I'm concerned, what I have just given here, of course, has sources. Okay, that's the way historians do their work. No, you don't say anything that is not supported by primary or secondary sources, Mr. Bernales. And for that particular reason, let us cross the bridge. We're already there. I agree with Sir Tody there that of course there is a need for us. There is no such thing. A history book that is like the Quran or the Bible that is not going to be assailed. The nature of history writing is such that whenever new facts are made available, then those that had been refuted will have to give its way. Will have to give way. There is no choice for that. No? That's how it is. That's the nature of it. It's been happening for centuries now. No? For years now, one particular historical version will have to give way to a more comprehensively written historical work, Mr. Bernales.
All right, I agree, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone would like to rejoin or maybe add? Or you're already, it's already 12:30. And we still have plenary speakers this afternoon at 1 o'clock. We have Professor Ayan Parcon of Ateneo and followed by Dr. Juchiro Tanabe of Japan. And we have also paper presentation. So maybe while momentarily having our lunch break, a very short lunch break because we have to go back at 1. May I ask before that, may I ask our Director of Research and Publication, to present the virtual certificate to our plenary speaker, Sir Ray Luis Montes Claros.
Sir Ray. Thank you, Doc Roger. Thank you, Sir Ray, for that very rich information again about the history, particularly here in Mindanao. So this time, allow me to present the certificate virtually. Can it be seen now, Doc Roger?
Yes,
Yes.
but I beg that the doctor there as a title be removed because
Yes,
I,
yes, Sir Ray.
I still have to deserve the title.
Yes, sorry. We have the anyway. It will the moment we'll send this to you. It will be the correct one. And
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So allow me to read this certificate of appreciation. This is presented to Sir Ray Luis Montes Claros from MSU-IIT for sharing his knowledge and expertise as a plenary speaker with his talk entitled Radical Democracy and the Survival of the Philippine Republic in the 4th Philippine Politics and Culture Conference, with the theme Radical Politics and the Future of the Philippine Democracy, held on April 22 to 23, 2022 at 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Philippine time. Given this 23rd day of April 2022 at Quezon College, Tigre City, province of Davao del Sur, Philippines. Signed, Reverend Father Dexter Veloso, DCD, President of Social Ethics Society. Signed, Dr. Annalisa Serbo, Director, Research and Publication Office, Quezon College Incorporated. Thank you so much, sir, and congratulations.
yeah, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Doc
Thank you.
Ana. Thank you, Sir Ray. Thank you, Sir Samson, and all of us here. Thank you so much. We'll have our lunch break, and please resume at 1 o'clock because we'll be hearing the plenary talk of Professor Ayan Parcon from Ateneo de Davao University. So hold on lang muna tayo for the virtual lunch lang muna. What I mean is kanya-kanya. I mean kanya-kanya munang lunch. Kanya-kanya. Sir Engineer, i-suspend lang ito, Engineer, o ihang lang nato. What is this? How do we do this, Engineer Nelson?